Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere so cold that your eyelashes freeze together when you blink, where exposed skin turns black in under 2 minutes, and where the locals have a saying that roughly translates to, the air itself can bite you. We're going to Yakutia, officially the Sakha Republic, a region in northeastern Siberia that holds the record for the coldest inhabited place on Earth. We're talking about temperatures that regularly plunge to minus 71 degrees Celsius, that's minus 96 degrees Fahrenheit for my American friends, where winter lasts 8 months and where survival is an acute camping trip. It's a full-time job that your ancestors either mastered or, well, they didn't become your ancestors. You're standing in the village of Oymyakon right now, in your imagination at least, and the cold isn't just uncomfortable. It's a physical presence, a malevolent entity that presses against every exposed millimeter of your body. Your breath doesn't just fog. It crystallizes instantly into tiny ice particles that tinkle as they fall to the ground, a phenomenon locals call the whisper of the stars. The metal door handle of the building behind you, touch it with bare skin and you'll leave a layer of yourself behind, frozen to the surface like some grotesque biological weld. Your phone died 12 seconds after you pulled it from your pocket, the battery giving up in what I can only describe as electronic suicide. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm genuinely curious if someone's listening to this in actual Siberia at 3 a.m., living the authentic experience. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you need to understand about Yakutia is that it makes Antarctica look like a casual inconvenience. Sure, Antarctica gets colder on paper. Those research stations have recorded minus 89 degrees Celsius, but nobody actually lives there. No children walk to school there. No one raises cattle or grows vegetables or builds permanent homes and says, yeah, this is fine. This is where my family will stay for the next 1,000 years. Yakutia is different. Roughly 1 million people call this frozen hellscape home, and they've been doing it successfully since before the pyramids were built. You're dressed, hypothetically, in what an unprepared outsider might wear. A nice puffy synthetic jacket, thermal underwear from a sporting goods store, maybe some insulated boots rated to minus 40 degrees Celsius. Congratulations, you'll be dead in about 20 minutes if you stay outside. Your fancy modern gear, with its space-age polymers and its thermal ratings and its moisture-wicking technology, is absolutely worthless here. It's designed for cold. This isn't cold. This is something else entirely, something that requires a different vocabulary, a different understanding of what temperature even means. The Yakut people, also called the Sakha, figured this out approximately 800 to 1,000 years ago when they migrated north from the Lake Baikal region. Historians still argue whether they were fleeing Mongol expansion, seeking new hunting grounds, or following some spiritual calling, but regardless of why they came, they arrived in a place that should have killed them within the first winter. Didn't. And the reason you're not reading about that tribe that froze to death in Siberia in a footnote of some academic text is because they cracked the code, animal skin. Not just any animal skin, mind you. We're not talking about the leather jacket that makes you look cool at a motorcycle rally. We're talking about thick, properly prepared reindeer hide with the fur intact, layered and oriented with a sophistication that rivals anything modern textile science has produced. We're talking about horse leather so tough it can stop the wind that screams across the tundra at 60 kilometers per hour. We're talking about bear fur so dense that it creates a microenvironment between your skin and the apocalyptic cold outside. You watch as a local woman walks past you, completely unbothered by the temperature that's currently trying to murder you. She's wearing a traditional doha, a massive fur coat that reaches her ankles, and it's made from reindeer hide, fur turned inward against her body, with an outer layer of wind-resistant horse leather. Her feet are wrapped in unti, boots made from reindeer leg skin, with the fur inside and the tough outer hide providing a barrier against the frozen ground. On her hands are mittens, not gloves, never gloves, because separating your fingers in this cold is basically asking for frostbite. Made from the paw fur of Arctic fox, the densest natural insulation on the planet. She's not moving quickly. No one moves quickly here in winter. Quick movement means sweating, and sweat means moisture, and moisture in your clothing layers means ice crystals forming against your skin, and ice crystals against your skin means you're starting the process of freezing to death from the inside out. It's counterintuitive. You'd think you'd want to rush from building to building, minimizing exposure time, but the Yakut learned millennia ago that slow, deliberate movement keeps you alive. The science behind why animal skin works where modern materials fail is actually fascinating, in a this-could-save-your-life kind of way. Synthetic insulation, even the really good stuff, works by trapping air in tiny pockets. The air acts as an insulator, slowing heat transfer from your body to the environment. This works beautifully down to about -30 degrees Celsius or -40 degrees Celsius. Below that, you run into problems. The moisture from your body, and you're always producing moisture through breath, through minimal perspiration, through the humidity your skin naturally releases, starts to condense and freeze within those synthetic fibers. Once that happens, you've essentially turned your insulation into a refrigeration unit. It's now actively conducting heat away from your body. Animal fur, particularly the fur of creatures that evolved in Arctic conditions, operates on a different principle entirely. Reindeer fur is hollow. Each individual hair is essentially a tiny tube of air, and thousands of these tubes create an insulation system that's not just trapping air between fibers but within the fibers themselves. The fur is also hydrophobic. It sheds moisture rather than absorbing it. A reindeer can swim across an icy river, walk onto the bank, give a single shake, and be almost completely dry. That same property means that when you're wearing reindeer fur, the moisture your body produces doesn't accumulate and freeze. It's wicked away and expelled. But here's where it gets really clever, and this is knowledge that the Yakut people developed through centuries of trial and error and, presumably, a lot of frozen ancestors. It's not just about having fur. It's about having the right fur in the right place, oriented in the right direction, layered in the right order. The doha that woman is wearing, the inner layer is softer winter reindeer fur, taken from animals in their prime insulation phase, when they've built up their coat for the deep cold. This layer sits with the fur against her skin. Why? Because it creates a microclimate boundary, a zone of trapped air warmed by her body heat. The outer layer is horse leather, treated with fish oil and smoke until it's virtually windproof, sewn with sinew using techniques that leave no gaps where wind can penetrate. Wind, you're discovering, is the real enemy here. The actual air temperature is -65 degrees Celsius today. A pleasant autumn day by Oymyakon standards, practically balmy, but there's a wind blowing at about 40 kilometers per hour. That wind chill pushes the effective temperature down to somewhere around -80 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, the difference between blocked wind and unblocked wind isn't discomfort versus comfort. It's life versus death. A single gap in your wind barrier, a place where air can flow directly against your skin, can cause frostbite in under 60 seconds. You stumble toward a building, moving carefully because falling in this temperature could be fatal, giving the cold time to work on you while you struggle to get up and finally make it inside. The temperature difference is so extreme that your body doesn't know how to process it. Inside, it's a relatively warm -10 degrees Celsius. That's right, -10 degrees Celsius is room temperature here. Heating a building to actual comfort temperatures like 20 degrees Celsius would require so much fuel it would be economically impossible, and more importantly, it would create such a massive temperature differential with the outside that the structural integrity of the building would be compromised. The permafrost underneath would begin to melt. The building would sink, crack, collapse. An old man sits near a small stove, and he's wearing indoor clothes that would still be considered heavy winter where anywhere else on Earth. He looks at you, this hypothetical frozen you, and chuckles. In Yakut, he says something that a younger person translates, city person. You can always tell. They think the cold is just cold. He gestures at his own clothing, and you notice he's wearing fur even indoors, though lighter fur, spring fur, the kind taken from animals that were preparing for warmer weather. He tells you, through the translator, that his grandfather taught him how to prepare animal skins when he was 7 years old. Not as a hobby, not as a cultural preservation exercise, but as survival training. If you can't prepare your own skins, the old man says, you're dependent on others for your life. And what happens when those others aren't there? It's a level of self-sufficiency that modern urban life has made almost incomprehensible. Imagine if your ability to survive required you to personally transform a dead animal into clothing using nothing but tools you made yourself. The translator explains that there are different skins for different purposes, different seasons, different activities. Reindeer for primary insulation. Horse for wind-breaking outer layers. Arctic fox for extremities. Hands, feet, face coverings. Because fox fur is so dense that it maintains warmth even in the most exposed positions. Bear fur for sitting or sleeping on, because its thickness provides insulation from below. From the ground that's frozen solid to a depth of 500 meters and radiates cold upward like a planetary air conditioner stuck on maximum. You look down at your modern synthetic clothing, at the brand name that promised you extreme cold protection, and you feel a bit silly. Here's the uncomfortable truth: modern technology, for all its achievements, hasn't actually improved on what the Yakut people figured out 1,000 years ago when it comes to surviving true extreme cold. We've made it more convenient. You can buy a fur-lined parka without having to skin and cure the animal yourself. But the fundamental principle remains unchanged. In environments where the temperature can kill you in minutes, animal skin isn't primitive. It's optimal. Outside, the sun is setting, though setting is a generous term. During deep winter here, the sun barely climbs above the horizon before sliding back down, giving you about 3 hours of weak twilight that the locals generously call daytime. During that twilight, the temperature actually drops, because what little heat the sun provides is so minimal that its absence is almost meaningless. The cold is constant, patient, always waiting for you to make a mistake. Wearing the wrong layer, sweating through exertion, exposing skin, stopping to rest in the wrong place. The old man stands up, preparing to head back outside to his home. He wraps himself methodically. Inner fur layer, outer wind layer, face covering that leaves only a narrow slit for his eyes, mittens that connect to his coat sleeves with 0 gaps. The process takes 5 full minutes. Rushing gets you killed, the translator says, echoing what you're now realizing is probably the first rule of Yakutian survival. The old man opens the door, and the cold roars in like a living thing, and then he's gone into it, moving slowly, deliberately, a figure wrapped in animal skins walking into a temperature that wants him dead. And you realize, this is how humans survived here. This is how they're still surviving here. Not through dominating nature or conquering the environment with technology, but through understanding it, respecting it, and working with the materials that evolution spent millions of years optimizing. The reindeer, the horse, the fox, the bear, they all figured out how to live in -71 degrees Celsius long before humans arrived. The Yakut people's genius was recognizing that they could borrow those evolutionary solutions, that they could wear the cold weather adaptations of other species like a second skin. Outside, the wind howls, carrying ice crystals that sting like needles. Inside, you're warm, or at least not actively dying, surrounded by people whose ancestors mastered what might be humanity's most extreme permanent habitation. And you haven't even learned yet how they actually prepare those skins, how they construct their shelters, how they maintain fire without burning down their fur-insulated homes, or how they keep their minds intact through 8 months of darkness and cold that never, ever stops. But we're going to learn all of that together, slowly, methodically, the way you do everything in Yakutia if you want to survive. You wake up on your second morning in Yakutia, still hypothetically, still safely tucked in your actual warm bed wherever you really are, and the first thing you need to understand is that the landscape here is actively trying to kill you in ways that aren't immediately obvious. It's not just the temperature. The cold is the headline act, sure, but it's the supporting cast of geological and meteorological horrors that'll catch you off guard and finish you off while you're busy worrying about frostbite. Your Yakut guide, we'll call him Mikhail because that's his actual name, is preparing to take you out to check some hunting traps. He spent the last 40 minutes getting dressed, and you've learned not to rush him. Rushing, as we established, gets you killed. He notices you looking out the window at what appears to be flat, white terrain stretching to the horizon, and he laughs. Not a mean laugh, more of a, oh, you poor innocent laugh that people who live in extreme environments reserve for outsiders who don't yet understand how thoroughly screwed they are. You see flat land? He asks in Russian-accented English. Is not flat. Is death trap pretending to be flat. He gestures for you to come closer to the window. There. You see that white area that looks smooth? That is lake. Frozen lake, yes, but underneath is water. Maybe frozen 1 meter thick, maybe frozen 10 centimeters thick. You walk on 10-centimeter ice carrying 40 kilos of gear, you fall through, you are dead in 3 minutes. Not might be dead. Are dead. No rescue possible. You squint at the landscape. The lake he's pointing to looks identical to literally everything else, just white, flat whiteness. How do you tell the difference? You ask. Mikhail taps the side of his head. You learn. You learn or you die. Usually, you learn because your father or grandfather teach you, show you the signs. Sometimes you learn because you fall through and someone pulls you out fast and you never forget. Sometimes you don't learn and we find you in spring when ice melts. The permafrost, permanently frozen ground that in this region extends down 500 to 650 meters, creates a landscape that's fundamentally unstable in ways that are counterintuitive. You'd think that ground frozen solid would be, well, solid. But permafrost is actually ice mixed with soil, and it's under constant stress from temperature fluctuations, even small ones. During the brief summer, when temperatures soar to a nearly tropical 15 degrees Celsius or so, the top layer of permafrost melts. Not the whole thing, just the top meter or two. This creates what's called the active layer. When the active layer refreezes in autumn, it doesn't freeze uniformly. Water expands when it freezes, which creates pressure. That pressure has to go somewhere, and what it creates are features that Mikhail is now pointing out to you. Frost heaves, ice wedges, pingos, and the truly terrifying phenomenon called a pingo scar. That depression there, he says, indicating what looks like a slightly darker patch of snow about 200 meters away. That was Pingo, ice hill, pushed up by pressure from freezing water underground. Maybe 5 meters tall, maybe more. Then it collapsed. Now is whole filled with broken ice and water. You step on that, the ice breaks, you fall into water that is 0 degrees, your clothes freeze solid in seconds, you cannot move, you die. Historians actually have records of entire Yakut settlements that had to be abandoned because the permafrost became too unstable, creating too many hazards. One account from the early 1900s describes a village where, over the course of 3 winters, the ground fractured so severely that buildings began tilting at crazy angles, wells became inaccessible, and storage cellars, which were just deep holes in the permafrost, collapsed. The villagers had to relocate, taking their animals and their carefully prepared stores of animal skins and meat, because the land itself had become unlivable. But here's the really wild part. You can't just look at terrain and memorize safe versus dangerous zones, because the terrain changes. Not slowly over geological time, quickly over the course of a single winter. That lake Mikhail pointed out, last year it might have been solid ground. A particularly cold winter creates ice lenses in the soil, which push up the surface. A slightly warmer winter causes settling. The trails that were safe in November might be death traps by February. My grandfather, Mikhail says as he finishes his preparations. He could read the land like you read book. He would look at color of snow, at how wind makes patterns, at where birds fly, and he would know what is underneath. I am good, but not like him. He learned from his grandfather, who learned from his grandfather, back and back. Thousands of years of knowledge, how to read this land. You step outside together. Both of you now properly dressed in layers of animal skin, and immediately you're hit by something Mikhail calls ice fog. It's not regular fog. Regular fog is water droplets suspended in air. Ice fog is ice crystals suspended in air, and it has the bizarre property of existing only when temperatures drop below about -40 degrees Celsius. The ice crystals refract light in strange ways, creating halos around the sun, making distances impossible to judge, turning the landscape into a disorienting white void where sky and ground blur together. In strong ice fog, Mikhail explains, walking slowly and deliberately, you can get lost 5 meters from your house. We tie rope from house to barn, from barn to outhouse, because in bad ice fog you walk away from door and you cannot find door again. You wander in circles until cold takes you. This isn't theoretical. He tells you about a neighbor, just 3 years ago, who went out during heavy ice fog to check on his horses. He was found the next morning, frozen solid, less than 20 meters from his barn. He'd gotten disoriented, walked the wrong direction, and by the time he realized his error, he was too cold to make it back. The Yakut people developed a whole system of land navigation that doesn't rely on sight. Mikhail shows you how to read wind direction by feeling which side of your face gets colder. Wind in Yakutia comes predominantly from the northwest in winter, so if you can feel which direction the wind is hitting you from, you can orient yourself. You learn to recognize the sound of wind moving through different types of terrain. A low whistle means you're near dense taiga. A higher whistle means open tundra. A complete absence of sound means you're in a depression where cold air pools and you need to get out immediately before you're overcome. You're walking through what Mikhail calls taiga, the boreal forest that covers much of Yakutia. The trees here are Dahurian larch, one of the few species that can survive in permafrost. They're not majestic towering giants. They're twisted, stunted things, rarely growing taller than 10 or 15 meters. Their trunks gnarled and thick despite their modest height. These trees, Mikhail says, patting one affectionately, they are survivors like us. They grow slow, maybe 1 centimeter of trunk diameter every 20 years. This tree here, this small tree, is probably 300 years old. The larch trees provide crucial resources. Their wood, incredibly dense from growing so slowly, burns hot and long, essential when you need to maintain fire through 8-month winters. Their bark, when properly prepared, becomes waterproof and can be used to line boots or create containers. But the trees are also hazards. Dead standing larch, killed by particularly brutal winters or by permafrost instability undermining their roots, can fall without warning, especially when the temperature drops below -50 degrees Celsius and the frozen wood becomes brittle as glass. Mikhail shows you a fallen larch that came down recently. You can tell because there's no snow accumulation on the trunk yet. You hear cracking sound when walking in taiga during deep cold. You drop flat immediately. Sound is tree about to fall or ice breaking or the earth itself fracturing. You don't wait to see which one. You drop flat, make yourself small, protect your head. He demonstrates, moving with a speed that seems to contradict his earlier insistence on going slowly. This is only time you move fast. When you hear the crack, the animal tracks in the snow tell stories that Mikhail reads fluently. He points out ermine tracks, tiny paired prints indicating a weasel hunting for voles underneath the snow. Fox tracks that wander drunkenly, showing where the fox was listening for prey moving beneath the surface. Wolf tracks, large and purposeful, following the trail of something bigger. Wolves here are different, Mikhail says. Not like wolves in warmer places. These wolves, they hunt reindeer, yes, but they also know to follow humans sometimes. Not to attack, to scavenge. They know that humans sometimes die out here, and they wait. It's a cheerful thought, really. The idea that if you make a mistake, if you fall through the ice or get lost in ice fog or simply sit down to rest and never get back up, there's a wolf nearby who's going to appreciate your contribution to the ecosystem. Nature is healing or whatever. You pass what looks like a small hill and Mikhail stops. This is not hill. This is Kurgan ancient burial mound. Maybe 1,500 years old, maybe older. The permafrost preserves everything, so inside that mound is someone's ancestor, frozen exactly as they were when they died. Still wearing their clothes, still with their tools, their food, their animals that were sacrificed for their journey. He's quiet for a moment. The land here remembers everything. The permafrost is like hard drive, yes, saves all data. Bodies, buildings, forests from when climate was different. All frozen, all waiting. Historians and archaeologists absolutely love Yakutia for exactly this reason. The permafrost creates natural time capsules. In 2010, researchers found the preserved body of a woolly mammoth so intact that its muscle tissue was still edible, though apparently it tasted terrible, like freezer-burned meat that had been frozen for 40,000 years, which is exactly what it was. But more relevantly, they found numerous frozen burial sites of ancient Yakut and pre-Yakut peoples, complete with their winter clothing, their animal skin shelters, their tools for preparing hides. One particularly fascinating find from the 1990s was an intact winter dwelling that had collapsed and been frozen sometime around 800 CE. Inside were reindeer skin garments so well preserved that researchers could examine the exact stitching techniques, could see which direction the fur was oriented, could analyze the materials used to waterproof the leather. It was like finding a masterclass in extreme cold survival, frozen in time and waiting to teach us techniques that might otherwise have been lost. But Mikhail isn't thinking about archaeology. He's watching the sky, which has taken on a weird greenish tinge. "We need to go back," he says suddenly, and there's an urgency in his voice that wasn't there before. "Storm coming. Not snowstorm, cold storm. Temperature will drop maybe 10, 15 degrees in next hour. We need to be inside." "How can you tell?" you ask, because the sky doesn't look particularly threatening to your untrained eye. Color of sky, feel of wind, the way sound carries, is different before cold storm. He's already turning back, moving at that careful but purposeful pace. Cold storm is worse than blizzard. Blizzard, you can dig in, build snow shelter, wait it out. Cold storm brings clear sky and temperature that drops so fast your skin freezes before you notice. The metal of your tools becomes so cold that if you touch it, your skin sticks and tears off. Your eyes, if you open them too wide, the fluid starts to freeze. Is not survivable if you are caught outside. You're heading back now, and Mikhail is navigating through the ice fog and the sparse taiga with a confidence that speaks to decades of practice. He points out landmarks that you barely register as distinct. A large tree with a particular bend in its trunk, a configuration of snow drifts that indicates a large rock underneath, the way the ice fog moves differently in one area indicating a depression in the ground that should be avoided. "The land here, it teaches you respect," he says as you walk. "Not fear, respect. Fear makes you panic, makes you make mistakes. Respect makes you careful, makes you pay attention. My people, we live here for 1,000 years because we respect the land. We don't try to conquer it, don't try to control it. We learn its moods, we work with it, we take from it what we need. Animals for food and skin, trees for fire and shelter. But we don't take more than we need, and we don't pretend we are stronger than it." There's a philosophical depth to that statement that would be easier to appreciate if you weren't currently trying not to die of hypothermia in your imagination. But he's right, the entire Yakut approach to survival is based on humility. They don't build massive heated buildings that try to recreate tropical climates in the Arctic. They don't wear synthetic supersuits that promise to defeat the cold through technology. They accept that the environment is fundamentally hostile, and they adapt to it using materials and techniques that work with natural principles rather than against them. You can see the settlement now, a cluster of low buildings with smoke rising from chimneys. The smoke doesn't rise vertically, it's too cold for that. Instead it flows almost horizontally, driven by the density difference between the supercold air outside and the merely cold air inside. It's a visual reminder that even basic physics behaves differently here, that the normal rules don't quite apply. As you approach Mikhail's house, you notice something you hadn't paid attention to before. Every building sits on stilts, raised about 2 meters off the ground. If building sits directly on permafrost, Mikhail explains, the heat from building melts the permafrost underneath. Then building sinks, tilts, cracks. So we build on stilts, let cold air flow underneath, keep permafrost frozen. Even our animal barns, our storage buildings, all on stilts. It's another example of working with the environment rather than against it. In warmer climates, you'd build directly on the ground for stability. Here, that's suicide for your structure. You have to accept that the ground is permanently frozen and will remain so, and design accordingly. Inside, finally, you both begin the slow process of removing layers. This also can't be rushed. If you come in from -70 degrees Celsius temperatures and immediately strip down, exposing skin that's been compressed under multiple layers for hours, you can actually cause damage from the rapid temperature change. Mikhail shows you the proper technique. Remove outer wind layer, wait 5 minutes, remove next layer, wait 5 minutes, and so on. The entire process takes almost 30 minutes. His wife, Sardana, a woman who looks to be in her 60s but might be younger because this environment ages people, has tea waiting. Not regular tea. This is traditional sake tea with milk and salt and butter, served in small wooden cups. It tastes weird if you're not used to it, but it's full of fat and calories, and after hours in the cold, your body craves exactly this. You did well, Mikhail says, which coming from someone who's lived here his entire life feels like high praise. Tomorrow, if weather permits, I show you how we prepare the skins, how we take the hide from reindeer and make it into clothing that keeps you alive. Is not easy work, is not fast work, but is necessary work, and is work that has kept my people alive for 1,000 years. Outside, the cold storm Mikhail predicted is arriving. Through the window, you can see the temperature display that every house has. Minus 68 degrees Celsius and dropping. The sky is clear, crystal clear, and the stars are so bright they look artificial. In this clarity, this absence of any moisture or pollution in the air, starlight is visible in a way that people in warmer climates never experience. You can see the Milky Way as a distinct river of light across the sky. You can see individual stars that normally require telescopes. It's beautiful, objectively beautiful, and it's also lethally cold. The same conditions that create this perfect visibility, absolutely dry air, extreme cold, are conditions that would kill you in minutes if you were outside. Beauty and death, existing in the same moment, separated only by walls of animal skin and wood. Sardana says something in Yakut, and Mikhail translates. She says the land gives and the land takes. We take the animal skins to survive. The land takes us when we are not careful. Is balance. He sips his tea. Tomorrow you learn how we prepare what the land gives us, so we can survive what the land would take. The wind is picking up outside, and the building creaks slightly. Not dangerously, but enough to remind you that you're in a structure held together with techniques developed through centuries of trial and error. In an environment where engineering failures mean death. You're warm or at least not cold. You're safe or at least not in immediate danger. And tomorrow you'll learn how animal skin transforms from corpse covering into life-saving barrier, how the Yakut people develop techniques so sophisticated that modern science is still catching up to understanding why they work. But tonight, you're just grateful to be inside drinking salty butter tea, while outside the temperature drops to levels that shouldn't sustain human life but somehow, impossibly, does. You're awake before dawn. Not that dawn means much here in deep winter, where sunrise is more of a theoretical concept than an actual event. Mikhail is already up, and he's laid out several animal hides on a large work table in what you'd call a garage if garages were typically kept at minus 15 degrees Celsius and smelled like a combination of wood smoke, cured leather, and something vaguely biological that you're trying not to think too hard about. Today, he announces with the enthusiasm of someone about to show you his favorite hobby. You learn to prepare skins. Is not glamorous work. Is smelly, is hard, is take many weeks to do properly. But is most important skill for surviving here. You cannot buy this knowledge from store. You cannot download this knowledge from internet. You must learn with hands, with time, with patience. Before you is a reindeer hide that's been recently removed from the animal, and by recently we're talking maybe 3 days ago. It's frozen stiff as plywood, covered in dried blood and bits of tissue that cling to the underside. It looks absolutely nothing like the soft, pliable fur clothing you've seen people wearing. The transformation from this frozen horror to something you'd want against your skin seems impossible, like trying to turn concrete into silk. Mikhail picks up the hide. It takes both hands and considerable effort because frozen hide is incredibly heavy, and props it against the wall. First step is thawing, but not too fast. You thaw too fast. The hide gets weak. The hair falls out. You ruin everything. He gestures to the temperature. This room, we keep it cold enough that work is comfortable but not so cold that hide stays frozen. Maybe minus 10 degrees Celsius, maybe minus 15 degrees Celsius. Work temperature. Your modern factories, they would say this is crazy, but this is how you do it right. The thawing process takes about a day, and it can't be rushed. In warmer parts of the world, hide preparation involves soaking in water, but that's impossible here, water freezes. So the Yakut method involves patience and very gradual temperature adjustment. As the hide slowly softens, Mikhail shows you the first real step. Fleshing. Fleshing is exactly what it sounds like, and it's exactly as gross as you're imagining. Using a specialized tool, a curved metal blade set into a wooden handle called a uyat. You scrape away every bit of fat, meat, blood vessels, and connective tissue clinging to the hide's underside. If you leave fat on skin, Mikhail explains while demonstrating long, firm scraping motions, it will rot. Even in cold, it will rot slowly, and rotting fat smells terrible and ruins the hide. So you scrape everything until you see only the leather, clean and white. You try it yourself, and immediately you understand why this is a skill that takes years to master. Scrape too lightly and you don't remove the tissue. Scrape too hard and you cut through the hide itself, creating a weak point that will eventually tear. The pressure has to be firm but controlled, the angle has to be just right, and you have to maintain that exact consistency across the entire hide, which in the case of an adult reindeer is roughly 2 meters long and maybe 1.5 meters wide. My grandfather, Mikhail says, scraping away with the smooth confidence of someone who's done this 10,000 times. He could flesh entire reindeer hide in 3 hours. Perfect, clean, no damage. I take maybe 6 hours. He glances at your awkward, hesitant scraping. You take maybe 3 days and probably you make some holes. He's not being mean, he's being accurate. This is genuinely difficult. The scraping produces a pile of frozen flesh scraps that Mikhail tosses into a bucket. This we give to dogs, he says. Nothing is wasted. The meat we eat, the hide we make into clothing, the bones we boil for broth and then burn for heat, the sinew we use for sewing thread, the hooves we boil into glue. The reindeer gives everything, and we use everything. After several hours of scraping, your arms are tired in a way that suggests you'll discover new muscles tomorrow that you didn't know existed. The hide is finally clean, but it's also stiff, rigid, completely unsuitable for wearing. Now comes the important part, Mikhail says. Now we make it soft. In warmer climates, hide softening typically involves soaking in various chemical solutions, tannins from tree bark, oils, sometimes even urine because the ammonia breaks down proteins. But again, liquid solutions are problematic when the temperature is minus 60 degrees Celsius. The Yakut method, refined over centuries, is different and kind of brilliant in its simplicity. You smoke it. Mikhail has a dedicated smoking structure. A low building with racks inside and a fire pit in the center. The fire isn't for heat, it's for smoke. He carefully selects wood, only rotted larch, never fresh wood, because fresh wood produces the wrong kind of smoke. The rotted larch, when burned slowly with minimal oxygen, produces thick, cool smoke that's high in certain compounds that, and I'm simplifying the chemistry here, break down the collagen in the hide and make it pliable. The hide gets hung on the racks, and smoke washes over it for hours. Maybe 12 hours, maybe 24 hours, depends on the hide thickness, on the humidity in the air, on many things, Mikhail explains. You cannot rush. You check every few hours, you feel the hide, you know when it is ready. While the hide smokes, Mikhail shows you other hides in various stages of preparation. There's a horse hide that's been smoked and is now being stretched, mounted on a wooden frame and pulled tight with leather straps. Horse hide is different from reindeer, he says. Is thicker, is tougher, but is not as warm. We use horse hide for outer layer, for wind breaking. You see how I stretch it? This makes leather tight and strong, makes it almost windproof. The stretching process is fascinating and slightly medieval looking. The hide is pulled until it's drum tight on the frame, then left to dry for days while remaining stretched. This realigns the collagen fibers in the leather, making them parallel and dense rather than random and loose. The result is leather that's genuinely wind-resistant, not waterproof in the modern Gore-Tex sense, but wind simply doesn't penetrate it the way it would penetrate unstretched hide. Historians studying ancient Yakut clothing have found that this stretching technique produces leather with a wind resistance comparable to some modern synthetic materials. In wind tunnel tests, yes, someone actually did wind tunnel tests on centuries-old leather from frozen archaeological sites. Properly stretched and smoked horsehide blocked about 95% of wind penetration. For comparison, your typical denim jeans block maybe 40%, and even decent synthetic windbreakers only block about 85% unless they're specifically designed high-tech materials. Now I show you the sewing, Mikhail says, pulling out what looks like a finished garment that needs repair. A torn seam in a reindeer skin coat. The thread he uses isn't thread in the modern sense. It's sinew, specifically reindeer leg sinew, which has been dried, split into thin strands, and twisted together. Sinew thread is stronger than any thread from store, he explains, and is natural. It expands and contracts with the hide when temperature changes. Modern thread, synthetic thread, it doesn't move the same way as the leather, so seams break. Sinew thread moves with leather, stays tight in extreme cold. The needles are metal now, steel needles traded or purchased, but Mikhail shows you older needles made from bone, from the leg bones of reindeer, carved and polished until they're smooth enough to pierce hide without tearing it. My grandmother used these bone needles her whole life. She said metal needles, they get too cold, they hurt your fingers to hold them. Bone needles, they don't pull heat from your hands the same way. The sewing technique itself is specific and purposeful. Mikhail shows you how every seam is double-stitched. One row of stitches visible on the outside, another row slightly offset on the inside. Double stitching means if one stitch breaks, the seam doesn't fall apart. Means wind cannot come through the needle holes. Is more work, yes, but is necessary work. He also demonstrates how the seams are oriented. On a traditional doha, the long fur coat, the major seams run vertically down the body rather than horizontally. If seam goes horizontal, Mikhail explains, wind pushes against seam and tries to open it. If seam goes vertical, wind flows along seam, cannot push through. Is small detail, but small details are difference between surviving and dying. You're watching him work, marveling at the precision. Each stitch exactly the same length as the one before, exactly the same distance from the edge of the hide, when Sardana comes in with more tea. She looks at the hide you attempted to flesh earlier, examines it critically, and says something in Yakut that makes Mikhail laugh. She says your scraping is like baby trying to feed himself. Messy and missing many spots, but she says is okay, everyone starts this way. Her first hide she completely ruined, cut straight through it in 5 places. Sardana takes the uyat and demonstrates, her hands moving with unconscious skill, the blade finding the exact right angle and pressure without her seeming to think about it. She's probably in her 60s, as mentioned before, but her hands are strong and steady, and she clears in 5 minutes an area that took you 30 minutes to poorly scrape. She has been doing this for 50 years, Mikhail says with obvious pride, since she was 10 years old. The cultural knowledge embedded in hide preparation is staggering when you actually think about it. These aren't techniques you can learn from a book or a YouTube video. You need to feel the resistance of the hide under the scraping tool, need to see the color change as smoke penetrates the leather, need to develop the muscle memory for placing stitches blind because you're working on the inside of a garment in poor light. Anthropologists who study traditional crafts estimate it takes roughly 5 to 7 years of regular practice to become truly proficient at hide preparation, and closer to 15 or 20 years to achieve master-level skill. And yet, every adult in traditional Yakut communities would have had at least basic competence in this skill. Not as a hobby, not as a craft, but as a survival necessity. If you couldn't prepare hides, you were dependent on someone else for your winter clothing, and that dependency could literally cost you your life if circumstances separated you from your community. Mikhail pulls out a different hide now, one that's been fully prepared and is incredibly soft, almost buttery in texture. This is winter reindeer hide, from animal killed in November when coat is thickest. Feel the fur. You run your hand over it, and the fur is dense beyond anything you've experienced. Your fingers don't even reach the leather base. They just sink into this incredibly thick layer of hollow hairs. This fur is maybe 4-5 centimeters deep, is best insulation in nature. He shows you how the fur direction matters. For clothing worn directly against skin, for faces inward against body. This creates air layer warmed by body heat. For outer clothing, fur can face outward or inward depending on purpose. Fur facing out looks better, protects fur from damage. Fur facing in gives more warmth but wears out faster. There are hides from different animals spread around the workspace, and Mikhail walks you through each one's properties. Arctic fox fur, incredibly dense, used for trim on hoods and for mittens. Fox fur, you notice, has different lengths of hair, long guard hairs on top, short dense underfur below. This is why is so warm. The underfur traps air. The guard hairs break wind. Bear hide, thick and heavy, used primarily for sleeping on or sitting on. Bear fur is too warm for clothing unless is very cold. But for ground insulation, for keeping cold from earth away from your body, is perfect. Wolf fur, which you'd think would be great but actually isn't ideal. Wolf fur looks warm, but is not as dense as reindeer or fox. We sometimes use for decoration, but not for serious cold weather clothing. And then there's seal skin, which requires completely different preparation because it's not fur. It's more like very thick leather with hair. Seal skin we get from trade with people who live on coast, near ocean. is best for boot soles because is waterproof and is tough. For boots, we use reindeer leg skin for upper part, seal skin for sole, and inside we line with Arctic fox fur. These boots, properly made, you can walk through -70 degrees Celsius weather and your feet stay warm. The boots, called unti, are themselves works of engineering that took centuries to perfect. Mikhail shows you a pair in construction. The sole is thick seal leather, nearly waterproof, flexible even in extreme cold. The upper is reindeer leg skin, which is naturally tougher and less insulative than body skin. You don't want your boots to be too warm because warm feet sweat, and sweat means moisture, and moisture means ice. The inside is lined with dried grass for wicking moisture away from the foot, then a layer of thin Arctic fox fur for insulation. The boots come up nearly to the knee and are held in place with leather straps that wrap around the leg. These boots, Mikhail says, they are most important piece of clothing. You can survive cold body if you must, is painful but possible. You cannot survive cold feet. Feet freeze, you cannot walk, you cannot get to shelter, you die. So boots must be perfect. Historians examining preserved ancient Yakut footwear have found that the basic design hasn't changed significantly in at least 800 years, probably longer. The boots recovered from frozen archaeological sites are essentially identical in construction to boots made today, suggesting that this design was perfected long ago and has remained optimal. Modern Arctic boots, even military-grade ones, are often less effective than traditional unti in extreme conditions because they rely on insulation that can absorb moisture and freeze, while unti rely on a layered system that wicks moisture away from the foot before it can freeze. Sardana has finished her tea and is now working on a different hide, this one being turned into mittens. She shows you why mittens are always used instead of gloves. Fingers together share warmth. Fingers separate lose warmth. Also, separate fingers mean more seams, more places for wind to come through. The mittens she's making are massive, large enough that you could probably fit 3 or 4 of your regular-sized hands inside one. Big mittens create airspace. Airspace is insulation. Also, big mittens mean you can pull hand inside mitten, make fist close to body to warm up if fingers start to get cold. The mittens have another clever feature. They're attached to the coat sleeves with leather cords, so they can't be dropped or lost. You drop mitten in -70 degrees Celsius, you bend down to pick it up. Maybe your hand is exposed for 15 seconds. 15 seconds is enough for frostbite to start. So mittens attached to coat, always. You're several hours into this lesson now, and you're beginning to understand that hide preparation isn't a single skill. It's a constellation of interlocking skills, each one requiring knowledge and experience, each one critical to the final product's ability to keep you alive. You need to know which animals to use for which purposes. You need to know when to harvest. Winter reindeer hide is different from summer reindeer hide, and using the wrong seasonal hide for clothing can literally kill you. You need to know how to flesh, how to smoke, how to stretch, how to sew. You need to know how to orient fur, how to layer materials, how to construct seams that won't leak wind. This knowledge, Mikhail says, apparently reading your thoughts, is our wealth. Other people, they measure wealth in money, in gold, in property. We measure wealth in knowledge of how to survive. My children, they know all this. He gestures at the hides, the tools, the partially constructed garments. Because I teach them, because Sardana teaches them, because their grandparents teach them. This knowledge is more valuable than any amount of money because money cannot buy survival in -70 degrees Celsius. Only skill can do that. Outside, the sun is making its brief appearance above the horizon. A weak, pale disk that provides light but essentially zero heat. Through the window, you can see people moving through the settlement, all of them wrapped in their animal skin garments, all of them moving with that characteristic slow, deliberate gait. Each person is wearing the culmination of weeks or months of hide preparation work, of skills passed down through generations, of accumulated knowledge about what works and what doesn't when the margin between life and death is measured in the thickness of properly prepared fur. The hide that's been smoking is ready now. Mikhail pulls it from the rack and hands it to you. It's transformed soft, pliable, with a rich brown color and a smell that's actually not unpleasant, like wood smoke and leather. Feel how soft, he says, but also feel how strong. You cannot tear this easily. This hide, properly prepared, will last 10 years, maybe 15 years of hard use, and will keep you alive every day of those years. Sardana says something, and Mikhail nods. She says tomorrow, if you want, you can help sew boots. Is good to know how to make boots. Is good to understand every step, from animal to clothing. Then you truly appreciate what you wear, and you truly understand how our people survived for 1,000 years in place where survival should be impossible. The temperature outside is dropping again as the brief day ends. The thermometer reads -69 degrees Celsius, and the clear sky means it will probably drop another few degrees overnight. But inside this workspace, surrounded by hides in various stages of preparation, you're warm enough. The knowledge represented in this room, how to transform death into life, animal into armor, raw material into sophisticated survival technology, is the accumulated wisdom of countless generations, refined through trial and error when error meant death. And you're just beginning to understand how much more there is to learn. Morning of day 4, if we're still counting, though honestly time gets weird when the sun barely makes an appearance and every day is just varying shades of dark and cold. Today Mikhail has promised to teach you about layering, which sounds straightforward until you remember that everything in Yakutia that sounds straightforward is actually nightmarishly complex and has killed at least a few people who thought they understood it but didn't. You're standing in what serves as Mikhail's dressing room, which is really just a corner of the main living space where various garments hang on pegs, organized in a way that seems random but obviously isn't. Layering, Mikhail announces, is science and is art and is difference between comfortable and dead. Most outsiders, they think more layers is always better. This is wrong. Too many layers, you sweat. Sweat freezes. You die. Too few layers, you freeze directly. You also die. Must be exactly right. He pulls down a garment you haven't seen before. A thin, lightweight shirt made from what looks like soft leather. This is first layer. Is summer reindeer hide, very soft, very thin. Worn directly against skin with fur side in. You examine it. The leather is almost suede-like in texture, incredibly supple, and the fur is short and fine, maybe only a centimeter long. Summer reindeer fur is different from winter fur. Is lighter, is more breathable. This layer does 3 things. It wicks moisture away from skin, it creates first air layer for insulation, and it protects your skin from chafing against thicker fur of outer layers. The concept of wicking is interesting here because we're not talking about modern synthetic moisture-wicking fabrics that move sweat away through capillary action. We're talking about fur that's naturally slightly hydrophobic and that creates enough air circulation to allow moisture to sublimate, to go directly from ice crystals to vapor without passing through a liquid phase. In the extreme cold of Yakutia, your body's moisture output immediately freezes if it contacts cold surface. The genius of the first layer is that it keeps your body moisture as vapor for just long enough that it can escape the garment system entirely rather than freezing against your skin. You wear this first layer always, even inside house, Mikhail says. Even when sleeping, you take it off only to wash, maybe once per month in winter, maybe twice if you are a very clean person. Once per month. He sees your expression and laughs. In winter, you do not sweat like in summer. Your body produces very little moisture, and the cold, it kills bacteria, kills smell. Washing clothes in winter is difficult. Water must be heated, clothes must be dried, and wet clothes in winter are dangerous. So we wash infrequently, and the clothes do not smell because cold prevents bacterial growth. It's a weird application of microbiology that actually makes sense. The bacteria that cause body odor can't really function below about -10 degrees Celsius, and you're wearing clothes in -70 degrees Celsius environments. Your clothes are essentially being sterilized by the cold every time you go outside. Modern Antarctic researchers have discovered the same thing. In extreme cold, you can wear the same clothes for weeks without them developing odor because the bacteria that would normally make them smell are either dead or dormant. Layer 2 is another reindeer skin garment, but this one is made from winter hide and is substantially thicker. This is middle layer. Winter reindeer hide, fur side in, fur maybe 3 or 4 centimeters deep. This is main insulation layer. Mikhail helps you put it on over the first layer. It's surprisingly lightweight for how thick it is. Remember, reindeer fur is hollow, so it's mostly air. But the moment it's on, you feel the temperature difference. Even in the relatively warm -10 degrees Celsius of the house, the garment is creating a noticeably warm microenvironment. The air between first layer and second layer, Mikhail explains, this air is warmed by your body. The fur of second layer traps this warm air, prevents it from escaping. Is like having personal climate zone around your body. He adjusts the garment, making sure it fits properly at the neck and wrists. Fit is important. Too loose, warm air escapes. Too tight, you compress fur, reduce insulation. Must be exactly right. Layer 3 is where it gets interesting. This is the wind layer, the outer shell, and it's not fur at all. It's leather, specifically horse leather that's been smoked and stretched and treated with fish oil until it's almost armor-like in its stiffness. This layer, fur does not matter. This layer is for stopping wind. Wind is enemy. Wind strips away warm air layer around your body, brings cold air directly to your insulation, reduces effectiveness of everything. The horse leather coat, also called a doha, though technically that term can refer to any long coat, is surprisingly heavy. The leather is at least 3 or 4 millimeters thick in places, dark brown and almost shiny from the fish oil treatment. Fish oil makes leather water resistant and keeps leather flexible in extreme cold. Regular leather, untreated leather, becomes brittle at -60 degrees Celsius, -70 degrees Celsius. Breaks like glass. Fish oil treated leather stays flexible to -80 degrees Celsius, maybe colder. Historians actually debate about when the Yakut people started using fish oil treatment for leather. Some argue it's an ancient technique, possibly brought from their origins near Lake Baikal, where fish were abundant. Others suggest it might have been adopted later, possibly influenced by contact with coastal peoples who were already using marine oils for waterproofing. Regardless of origin, the technique is absolutely critical. Untreated leather is essentially useless in Yakutian winter conditions. Mikhail shows you the construction of the wind layer. The seams are all double-stitched, as mentioned before, but there's an additional detail you hadn't noticed. The seams are on the inside, with the smooth outer surface unbroken. Seams on outside create tiny ridges where wind can push through. Seams on inside, covered by smooth leather, wind flows over without penetrating. The coat extends down to mid-calf, and Mikhail explains why. Long coat protects legs, creates warm air column from neck to ankles. Short coat, modern jacket style, leaves legs exposed to wind, creates cold at thighs and knees. Long coat is better, always. The sleeves are long enough that they extend past your wrists, with leather straps that wrap around your hands to prevent them from riding up. If sleeve rides up, exposes gap between mitten and sleeve, wind enters, warm air escapes, you get frostbite on wrist. Gap is enemy. Now come the pants, which are also layered. First layer is light summer reindeer hide pants. Fur in. Second layer is winter reindeer hide pants. Fur in. There's no outer wind layer for legs because the long coat provides that protection. Pants are simpler than upper body because coat protects, but is still important. Fur must be oriented correctly, fit must be right. The boots, those anti we discussed yesterday, go on next, and Mikhail demonstrates the proper technique. First, dried grass is stuffed into the toe area. Grass wicks moisture from foot, keeps foot dry. Every evening you remove grass, dry it by fire, use fresh grass next day. Then the boot goes on, followed by the elaborate wrapping of leather straps that secure it and, critically, seal the gap between boot and pants leg. This gap is dangerous. Cold air sinks will flow down inside your clothing through any gap. Must seal completely. On your head goes a hat, and calling it a hat is like calling a Formula 1 car a vehicle. It's technically accurate but fails to convey the engineering involved. This is a full head covering made from Arctic fox fur, the densest natural fur on the planet. It covers everything except a narrow slit for your eyes, with extra fur around the face opening that extends out several centimeters. This extended fur, it breaks wind before wind reaches your face, creates dead air zone where your breath can warm the air you breathe. Without this, breathing -70 degrees Celsius air directly will damage your lungs. The mittens complete the ensemble, those massive, seemingly absurd mittens that are large enough to sleep in. They're attached to the coat sleeves with leather cords, and they have an additional feature you hadn't noticed before. A slit along the inside of each mitten that allows you to pull your hand out and into the sleeve of your coat without removing the mitten from your body. Sometimes you need your fingers for fine work, tying knot, fixing tool. You pull hand into sleeve, work inside coat where is warm, then put hand back in mitten. Never expose bare hand to outside air if you can avoid. You're now wearing approximately 15 kilograms of animal skin. You can barely move, and Mikhail is looking at you critically, adjusting things, tightening straps here, loosening them there. Now we go outside, and you will learn if I dressed you correctly. The moment you step outside, you understand. The cold that was overwhelming on day one, when you were wearing your useless modern synthetic gear, is now manageable. Not comfortable, not pleasant, but manageable. You can feel the cold, certainly. You can feel it on the small exposed section of your face around your eyes. You can feel it when you breathe in, though the extended fur of the hat has warmed the air somewhat before it enters your lungs. But your body, your core, your extremities, they're warm. Not hot, not sweating, but genuinely warm. The system works, Mikhail says, and there's satisfaction in his voice. Because each layer does its job and only its job. First layer manages moisture. Second layer insulates. Third layer blocks wind. Each layer alone would fail. Together, they create a system that allows humans to survive in conditions that should kill humans. You start walking slowly, always slowly, and as you move, you begin to understand another aspect of the system. The layers move independently of each other. The outer wind layer slides over the insulation layer, which shifts slightly over the inner moisture-wicking layer. This movement prevents compression of the fur, maintains the air pockets that provide insulation, and prevents any single layer from becoming saturated with moisture. Modern extreme cold weather gear tries to achieve similar results, but typically fails because it relies on synthetic insulation that compresses over time and with use, reducing effectiveness. The other issue is that modern gear often tries to make one layer do multiple jobs, be both insulating and wind-resistant, or be both moisture-wicking and insulating. The Yakutia system, refined over centuries, recognizes that each function requires a dedicated layer with specific properties. Mikhail leads you to an open area away from buildings. Now we test. We stand here for 1 hour. We do not move. This is real test of clothing system. Not walking, which generates heat, but standing still, letting cold attack you with full force. 1 hour of standing motionless in minus 68 degrees Celsius sounds like slow-motion suicide, but you're committed to this imaginary experience, so here we are. The first 10 minutes are fine. You're warm, comfortable, even. 15 minutes in, you're starting to feel the cold on your face, the only exposed skin. Your eyes are watering from the cold air, and the tears are freezing on your eyelashes. 20 minutes, and you're doing that subtle shifting of weight from foot to foot that people in cold weather do unconsciously, trying to maintain circulation. Notice, Mikhail says, that you are not shivering. Shivering means your core temperature is dropping, means your clothing system is failing. You are cold, yes, but you are not freezing. Your body is maintaining temperature. This is success. 30 minutes. Your face is numb now, at least the parts that are exposed. You're breathing carefully through your nose, letting the nasal passages warm the air before it hits your lungs. Breathing through your mouth at this temperature would be painful and potentially damaging. 40 minutes, and you're genuinely impressed that you're still functional. Your fingers and toes are cold, but not painfully so. Your core is still warm. 50 minutes, Mikhail calls it, is enough. You have proven the system works. Now we go inside before your face gets frostbite. You head back, and the relief when you enter the building is profound. Not because you were in immediate danger outside, but because the psychological stress of being in that environment, even when properly protected, is exhausting. Back inside, Mikhail shows you the proper removal technique, which is as precise as the putting on technique. Outer layer first, hung up to air out. Then mittens, examined carefully for any tears or damage. The hat, checked to make sure the fur isn't becoming matted or ice-covered. The boots opened up so the interior can dry. The grass inserts removed and placed near the fire to dry for tomorrow. Each evening you maintain your clothing, Mikhail says. You check every seam, every strap, every piece of fur. Small damage you fix immediately. Small damage becomes big damage, becomes system failure, becomes death. Maintenance is not optional. Zerdana is working on repairing a coat that has a small tear in the outer wind layer. She shows you her repair technique. The torn section is overlapped, then stitched with double rows of sinew thread. Then a patch of leather is placed over the entire area and stitched down. Repair must be stronger than original, Mikhail translates, because damaged area is weak point. Must make it strong again, or it will fail at worst possible time. The clothing system, you're realizing, isn't something you buy and then use until it wears out. It's something you maintain constantly, something you check daily, something that requires ongoing care and attention. It's a relationship between you and your survival gear, mediated through skills of inspection, repair, and preparation. In old times, Mikhail says, settling in with tea, before we had metal needles, before we had trade for steel tools, everything was made from what we could get from land. Needles from bone, thread from sinew, leather from animals we hunted, insulation from fur of those same animals. Was completely self-sufficient system. Now we use some metal tools, some things from outside, but basic system is same as was 1,000 years ago. He pulls out an old garment, clearly ancient, that's been preserved in the permafrost and then kept as a family heirloom. The leather is dark, almost black with age and oil treatment. The stitching is incredibly fine, done with bone needles and sinew thread. This was my great-great-grandfather's coat, made maybe 150 years ago. Look at construction is identical to coat you wore today. Same principles, same layering, same techniques. Because these techniques are perfect for this environment. Cannot improve on perfect. Anthropologists examining Yakut clothing from various time periods, from frozen archaeological sites dating back hundreds of years to modern garments, have found remarkably little variation in basic construction. The materials might change slightly, metal needles replacing bone, some modern synthetic threads supplementing sinew, but the fundamental design remains constant. This suggests that the Yakut clothing system reached an optimal state long ago and has been maintained because any deviation from that optimal state reduces survival effectiveness. You examine your own outfit, now hanging on pegs to dry and air out. The system that seemed so foreign and primitive when you first arrived now appears sophisticated, elegant even. Each layer serves a specific purpose. Each material is chosen for properties that can't be replicated synthetically. Each technique, the double stitching, the orientation of fur, the placement of seams, represents accumulated wisdom tested by centuries of survival in the most extreme inhabited environment on Earth. Tomorrow, Mikhail says, we talk about shelters, because clothing keeps you alive outside, but you cannot live outside. You need shelter, and building shelter in permafrost is its own special challenge. But tonight, you rest, and you appreciate that you now know how to dress for minus 70 degrees Celsius weather. Is knowledge that maybe saves your life someday, even if you never come to Yakutia again. Outside, the temperature is still dropping. The thermometer reads minus 71 degrees Celsius now, and the night is clear and still. Somewhere in the darkness, the permafrost is contracting, creating those fracture sounds that echo across the frozen landscape. The cold is absolute, unrelenting, patient. But inside, wrapped in layers of carefully prepared animal skin, humans survive and even thrive, protected by knowledge that's older than most nations, refined through trials that killed those who got it wrong, and maintained by people who understand that in this place, proper clothing isn't fashion or comfort. It's the thin line between life and death. Day 5 begins with Mikhail announcing that today you're going to understand why living in Yakutia requires more than just good clothing. It requires architectural engineering that would make modern builders weep with frustration. Building here is like building on enemy that never stops attacking, he says cheerfully over breakfast. The permafrost wants to destroy everything you build. The cold wants to crack everything. The wind wants to push everything over. And if you make mistake, building kills you instead of protects you. You're heading to a construction site. Yes, people build in winter here because winter lasts 8 months and waiting for summer would be impractical, where someone is putting up a new house. The foundation, such as it is, consists of steel pillars driven deep into the permafrost. extending about 4 meters down. Must go below active layer, Mikhail explains. Active layer is top layer of permafrost that melts in summer, freezes in winter. Building on active layer means building sinks, tilts, falls apart. Must anchor to stable permafrost below. The pillars aren't vertical, they're angled slightly outward at the top, creating a wider platform than the base. Frost heave, Mikhail says, gesturing at the angle. When permafrost freezes and expands, it pushes up with tremendous force. Straight pillars get pushed up out of ground. Angled pillars, the frost cannot push them up as easily. Is engineering solution that took many destroyed buildings to figure out. The foundation pillars have been in place for 2 years, left to settle and stabilize before construction could begin. 2 years. You can't just pour a foundation and start building the next week like in warmer climates. The permafrost needs time to refreeze around the pillars, to lock them in place. Rush the process and you'll have a building that shifts and cracks as the ground adjusts. Between the pillars and the actual structure is a gap, that 2-meter space we discussed earlier. This gap must remain open always. Cold air must flow under building, must keep permafrost frozen. Some outsiders, they see the gap and think that is wasted space, we should close it in, make it storage area. Those people destroy their buildings. You close the gap, warm air from building melts permafrost. Building sinks into the mud it creates. Building is destroyed. The structure going up is relatively simple, rough-cut larch logs for the frame and walls. But the logs aren't fitted tightly together the way you'd see in a traditional log cabin. There are gaps between them deliberately left. Air gaps, Mikhail says. Tight-fitted logs with no gaps create moisture trap. Moisture condenses between logs, freezes, expands, cracks logs. Gaps allow air circulation, allow moisture to escape. But won't gaps let in the cold? Yes, absolutely, which is where the next layer comes in. The interior walls aren't the logs, they're animal hide. Specifically, reindeer hides stretched over wooden frames, creating an inner skin to the building. The hide wall is maybe 1 meter inside the log wall. Between log and hide is airspace. Air is insulator, remember? This airspace, combined with hide wall, is what actually keeps building warm. The traditional dwelling, called a balagan, takes this principle to its logical extreme. A balagan is essentially a conical or rectangular structure made from wooden poles covered entirely in reindeer or horse hide. No logs, no solid walls, just a framework and animal skins. Balagan is portable, can be taken down and moved, is quick to build, Mikhail explains. Many people still use balagan for temporary shelters, for hunting camps, for reindeer herding stations far from permanent settlement. You're looking at a partially constructed balagan nearby, and it's architecturally fascinating in a brutal, practical way. The frame consists of long larch poles lashed together at the top, creating a structure that looks vaguely like a Native American teepee but with different proportions, wider at the base, less steep in angle. The poles are wrapped with horse leather strips for added wind resistance. Then the whole thing gets covered with reindeer hides that overlap like shingles, fur side out. Why fur out? You ask, because this seems counterintuitive? Wouldn't fur-in provide more insulation? Rain and snow, Mikhail answers. Fur-out sheds water, sheds snow. Fur-in would collect moisture, would freeze, would add weight and reduce insulation. For clothing worn against body, fur-in is better. For shelter wall where one side is exposed to weather, fur-out is better. The hides are attached to the frame using leather ties, not nails or screws. Metal becomes brittle in extreme cold, fails. Leather ties remain flexible, remain strong, and leather ties can be adjusted, tightened, as hides stretch or contract with temperature changes. The whole structure can be assembled in about 6 hours by 2 people who know what they're doing, and disassembled in maybe 2 hours with the hides rolled up and the poles bundled for transport. Inside a completed balagan, Mikhail takes you to one that's currently in use as a storage structure. The temperature is probably minus 30 degrees Celsius, which sounds terrible until you remember it's minus 70 degrees Celsius outside. That 40-degree difference is achieved entirely through passive insulation. Animal skins and trapped air. There's a fire pit in the center, just a shallow depression lined with stones, with a smoke hole at the top of the structure directly above it. Fire is complicated in skin building, Mikhail says, and this is clearly going to be one of those statements that precedes a detailed explanation of how many ways things can kill you. Too much fire, you create too much heat, skin walls dry out, become brittle, crack. Also, too much heat makes inside too warm, creates moisture from breathing and from bodies, moisture condenses on cold walls, freezes, makes ice layer on inside of walls. Ice is bad, adds weight, reduces insulation, makes structure unstable. The ideal temperature inside a winter dwelling, Mikhail explains, is around -10 degrees Celsius to -15 degrees Celsius when occupied. Warm enough that you're not freezing while sitting still, cold enough that moisture doesn't condense and freeze on the walls. Achieving this balance requires careful fire management. Small fires, maintained constantly, never allowed to grow large and hot. The fire is never for warmth of the fire itself, Mikhail says, and this concept takes a moment to process. The fire is for psychological comfort. Humans need to see fire, need to feel that fire is there. But the actual warmth comes from your clothing, from your sleeping furs, from the insulation of the building. The fire is minor contributor to actual temperature. This is counterintuitive to anyone from warmer climates, where fire is the primary heat source and shelters are designed to trap and circulate that heat. But in Yakutia, fire is supplementary. Your primary protection against cold is still those layers of animal skin you're wearing, and the building's job isn't to make you warm. It's to block wind and reduce the extreme cold to merely brutal cold. The smoke hole at the top of the balagan is adjustable. It can be opened wider or closed partially using a pull system. Wind direction matters. Wind from wrong direction pushes smoke back down into dwelling. Must adjust smoke hole to account for wind. Also, must balance large smoke hole lets smoke out but lets heat out and cold in. Small smoke hole traps heat but also traps smoke. Is constant adjustment. Carbon monoxide poisoning is a real concern, and Mikhail says every family has stories of someone who died from smoke inhalation or CO poisoning because they closed the smoke hole too much trying to keep heat in. You must choose. Be a little cold with good air, or be a little warmer with bad air that kills you. Is easy choice, but some people make wrong choice anyway. The permanent houses, like the one being constructed, have more sophisticated heating and ventilation, but they work on similar principles. Small stoves that burn larch wood, with carefully designed flue systems that maximize heat transfer to the building while venting smoke outside. The stoves are never allowed to burn hot and fast. They're maintained at a slow, steady burn that might last 8 to 12 hours on a single loading of wood. Hot fire is wasteful fire, Mikhail says. Hot fire sends most heat up chimney, uses too much wood, creates temperature swings that damage building. Slow fire transfers more heat to building, uses less wood, maintains steady temperature. The science here is actually solid. A slow, smoldering fire with limited oxygen produces more radiant heat and less convective heat, meaning more warmth stays in the building rather than escaping up the chimney. The interior layout of traditional homes is specific and purposeful. The sleeping area is always on the side of the building opposite the door, as far from the cold air that enters when the door opens as possible. Sleeping platforms are elevated, remember, cold air sinks, and are piled with layers of fur for insulation from below and above. You sleep inside fur bag on top of fur platform, Mikhail explains, like being inside insulation sandwich. Even if fire goes out during night, even if inside building drops to -40 degrees Celsius, you stay warm enough to survive in your sleeping furs. The door itself is an engineering challenge. It can't be a simple hinge door like in warmer climates because the temperature differential would create a permanent draft and would frost over immediately. Instead, traditional doors are multiple layers. An outer wind door made of thick wood or hide, an air gap space, then an inner door made of lighter material. The air gap between doors acts as a buffer zone, reducing the temperature shock when entering or leaving. When you enter from outside, Mikhail demonstrates. You open outer door, step into gap, close outer door behind you. Then you wait maybe 30 seconds. Let your body and clothing adjust to slightly warmer temperature. Then you open inner door, enter building. This prevents bringing -70 degrees Celsius cold directly into living space, prevents warm air from rushing out. Some traditional balagas and winter camps use animal hide instead of doors, thick reindeer hide flaps that overlap in multiple layers, creating a maze-like entrance that wind can't penetrate directly. You have to push through layer after layer of hide, each one blocking more wind, until you're inside. It's primitive but genuinely effective. There's no mechanical door that can seal as effectively against wind as multiple layers of flexible hide. Historians studying ancient Yakut and other circumpolar peoples have found that this multiple door or hide maze entrance design appears independently in Arctic cultures worldwide. Inuit, Sami, Chukchi, and others all developed similar solutions. This convergent evolution of architecture suggests that this design is optimal for the specific challenge of creating an entrance that blocks wind while remaining functional in extreme cold. Floor construction is another critical element. The floor can't be directly on the ground because, again, that would melt the permafrost. But it also can't be just bare planks because cold radiates up from the frozen ground below. Traditional floors are layered. Planks, then a thick bed of dried grass or moss, then reindeer hides, then more hides wherever people will be sitting or sleeping. Floor insulation is as important as wall insulation, Mikhail says. Maybe more important because you are in constant contact with floor. Windows in traditional structures are minimal or non-existent. Window is structural weak point, is cold point, is wind point, Mikhail explains. Better to have no window and use oil lamp for light than to have window and lose heat. Modern structures have windows, but they're small, triple-paned, and positioned on the sun-facing side of the building to maximize the minimal solar heat gain available during winter days. The construction you're watching is fascinating because it's happening in minus 65 degrees Celsius temperatures. The workers are moving slowly, taking frequent breaks inside a heated tent that's set up on site. They're doing everything in stages: work for 20 minutes, warm up for 10 minutes, work for 20 more. The larch logs they're working with are frozen solid, which actually makes them easier to cut and handle because the wood is less likely to split or crack when frozen. Building in winter seems crazy, Mikhail acknowledges, but is actually better than building in summer in some ways. In summer, ground thaws, becomes muddy, becomes unstable. Mosquitoes and biting flies make working outside torture. Is not exaggeration. The summer insects here can drive people and animals insane. Winter, ground is stable, no insects, and if you dress properly, can work outside. Just must work slowly and carefully. The roof is going on now, and it's steeply pitched, much steeper than you'd see in warmer climates. Snow load, Mikhail explains. Flat roof, snow accumulates, adds tremendous weight, can collapse roof. Steep roof, snow slides off. But the snow that does accumulate actually provides additional insulation, so the roof is designed to hold some snow while shedding most of it. It's a careful balance. One of the workers motions for you to come look at something. He's installing what looks like a ventilation pipe, but it's wrapped in hide and has a complex series of baffles inside. This is air intake, Mikhail translates. Brings fresh air into building, but the pipe is long and wrapped so incoming air is slightly warmed before entering living space. The baffles create turbulence that helps warm the air and trap any moisture. The entire building, when complete, will be what modern architecture would call a living structure. It requires constant attention and maintenance, checking for ice buildup, adjusting ventilation, maintaining the fire, monitoring for cracks or damage. Building here is not something you construct and then forget, Mikhail says. Building is relationship. You care for building, building cares for you. You ignore building, building kills you. You're back in Mikhail's house now, warming up after several hours at the construction site. His house is about 60 years old, he says, and has been maintained continuously. Every year we check foundation pillars, check walls, check roof, check everything. Small problems fixed immediately is why building lasts. Other people, they get lazy, they ignore small crack, small leak. Small problem becomes big problem becomes destroyed building. The walls of his house, those double walls with hides stretched over internal frames, show their age but are still solid. The hides have been replaced multiple times over the decades, but the basic structure remains sound. These walls, this system, has kept my family alive through 60 winters, through temperatures to minus 77 degrees Celsius, through storms that destroyed other buildings, through everything. Because system is good and because we maintain it properly. Sardana brings out tea, and she shows you something you hadn't noticed before. The teacups themselves are made from birch bark, insulated so they don't freeze your hands when you hold them. Even the smallest details of life here are designed around the reality of extreme cold. Everything, from clothing to buildings to simple containers, is engineered for an environment that's fundamentally hostile to human existence. Tomorrow, Mikhail says, we talk about food and fire, how to feed yourself and heat your dwelling without burning down your skin-covered shelter or poisoning yourself with smoke. But tonight, you understand that shelter in Yakutia is not comfort, is survival. And survival requires knowledge, requires skill, requires constant attention. Is exhausting sometimes, but is also life. Outside, the wind is picking up again, and you can hear it testing the walls, probing for weaknesses, looking for any gap where it can penetrate and bring its killing cold inside. But the walls hold. The hides stretch tight over wooden frames, the air gaps, the layers of insulation. They all work together to create a space where human body temperature can be maintained, where life can continue even when the outside world is actively trying to end it. The building breathes with the wind, flexes slightly, accommodates the pressure. It's not fighting the environment. It's working with it, understanding it, respecting its power, and that, perhaps more than any specific technique or material, is the real lesson of Yakut architecture. You don't conquer this land. You learn to live within it, using what it provides, accepting its terms, surviving through knowledge and adaptation rather than domination. Day 6, and you're learning that in Yakutia, the relationship between fire, food, and survival is a delicate dance where one wrong step means you either freeze, starve, or burn down your animal skin shelter. Mikhail is in what he calls his winter kitchen, a small separate structure about 10 meters from the main house, and the separation you're learning is absolutely deliberate. Cooking fire is most dangerous fire. Mikhail begins, stoking a small stove that's barely producing visible flames. Cooking fire must be hot enough to cook food, but cooking in building where walls are animal skin is invitation for disaster. One spark, one bit of burning wood that falls out, entire building can burn in minutes. So serious cooking we do in separate building. Small warming fire in main house, big cooking fire here. The winter kitchen is less insulated than the main dwelling. It's basically a log structure with minimal interior hide walls, because the cooking fire will provide enough heat to keep it barely tolerable. The stove itself is a masterpiece of folk engineering. Thick metal construction with multiple chambers that route smoke through a complex path before it exits, maximizing heat extraction while minimizing spark production. This stove design my grandfather made, Mikhail says with obvious pride, is based on designs going back hundreds of years, but he improved it, made it safer, made it more efficient. The smoke must pass through 3 chambers before going to chimney. This cools smoke, makes sure any sparks fall into ash chamber rather than going outside where they might land on roof. You watch as he prepares the day's main meal, which consists of frozen fish, some kind of whitefish pulled from the frozen river, and stroganina, which is raw frozen fish sliced paper thin. Stroganina is traditional, Mikhail explains, using a specialized knife to shave off translucent slices of fish. Fish is frozen solid, so you can slice it very thin, and you eat it frozen. The freezing actually preserves all nutrients, and raw frozen fish has nutrients that cooked fish loses. It sounds absolutely terrible until you try it. The frozen fish slices melt on your tongue, and the flavor is actually delicate, almost sweet, nothing like the fishy taste you'd expect. Fish frozen at minus 60 degrees Celsius. Minus 70 degrees Celsius freezes so fast that ice crystals don't have time to grow large and damage cell structure. Mikhail says, channeling his inner food scientist. So when fish thaws in your mouth, texture is perfect, flavor is perfect, is better than fresh fish in some ways. The fish that's being cooked, for those who want hot food, is being prepared in a method that seems counterproductive. It's being boiled in a pot with minimal water, creating more of a steam cooking situation. Too much boiling water is waste of fuel, Mikhail explains. Water takes enormous amount of heat to boil, and then most of that heat goes into air as steam. Minimal water, just enough to create steam, is much more efficient. Fish cooks just as well, uses half the wood. Wood fuel conservation is a constant concern. The larch trees grow slowly in this environment, and while there's technically plenty of forest, transporting wood in winter is difficult and dangerous. Most families use maybe 2-3 cubic meters of wood per month in winter, Mikhail says. That is for heating, for cooking, for everything. Must be very careful with wood. Must make every piece count. The stove fire is maintained at a steady, low level. Big fire is enemy, he repeats, and you're noticing this is a common theme. Everything in Yakutia is about controlled, moderate effort rather than intense bursts. Big fire uses too much wood, creates too much heat, is dangerous. Small fire, maintained constantly, gives you everything you need with minimal fuel and minimal risk. Sardana arrives with containers of what looks like milk, but Mikhail explains it's kumis, fermented mare's milk. In winter, fresh milk freezes immediately, is impossible to drink. So we ferment. Fermentation process creates alcohol and acids that lower freezing point. Kumi stays liquid at -20 degrees Celsius, -30 degrees Celsius. Also, fermentation preserves milk, gives you vitamins, gives you calories. The kumis taste sour and slightly fizzy, with a mild alcohol content, maybe 2% or 3%. It's not particularly pleasant to your untrained palate, but Mikhail drinks it like water. Kumis has vitamin C, prevents scurvy. In old times before we had trade with outside, before we had access to vegetables and fruits in winter, kumis and stroganina kept us from getting sick. Was complete nutrition, protein from fish, vitamins and minerals from kumis. The nutritional science of traditional Yakut diet is actually remarkable. Historians and anthropologists studying circumpolar diets have found that peoples like the Yakut, who had virtually no access to plant foods for 8 months of the year, nonetheless avoided deficiency diseases because their animal-based diet was so carefully balanced. Raw frozen fish provides vitamin C that would be destroyed by cooking. Fermented mare's milk provides B vitamins and probiotics. Organ meats, which Mikhail pulls out now, frozen liver from a reindeer, provide vitamin A and iron. Liver must be eaten fresh or frozen, never stored at warm temperature, because liver spoils fast. Mikhail says, slicing the frozen liver into chunks. Some of it he adds to the pot with the fish. Some of it he sets aside for eating raw and frozen. Raw frozen liver is best source of nutrients. Cooked liver is good but not as good. But some people, they cannot stomach raw liver, so we cook some. The metabolic demands of living in extreme cold are intense. Your body burns enormous amounts of calories just maintaining core temperature, even when you're properly clothed and sheltered. Mikhail estimates that an adult doing moderate work in Yakutian winter needs 4,000 to 5,000 calories per day, sometimes more. You eat less than you need, your body cannot maintain temperature, you become weak, you become vulnerable to cold. Must eat constantly, must eat high-calorie foods. Fat is particularly crucial. The meal Mikhail is preparing includes chunks of pure reindeer fat, not cooked into anything, just solid white fat cut into cubes. Fat has 9 calories per gram, protein and carbohydrate have 4, he explains. So fat is most efficient fuel for your body. In winter, we eat a lot of fat. Your body needs it. The pure fat chunks look unappetizing to modern sensibilities, but Mikhail eats them like candy, and he encourages you to try one. Fine, actually. Flavorless. Melting in your mouth. Coating your throat with oily residue, but not unpleasant. And you can feel the caloric hit, can sense your body recognizing this as high-density fuel. In old times, before we had sugar, before we had access to carbohydrates from outside, our diet was maybe 60% fat, 35% protein, 5% other, Mikhail says. Modern nutritionists would say this is unhealthy, would say we should eat more vegetables, more grains. But this diet kept our ancestors alive and strong. This diet is adapted perfectly for extreme cold environment. Research on traditional high-fat diets has actually vindicated much of what cultures like the Yakut have practiced for centuries. The Inuit, with their similar high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet, show very low rates of heart disease and metabolic disorders despite eating in a way that violates every mainstream nutritional guideline. The human body, it turns out, can thrive on almost pure animal products if those products are consumed fresh, raw, and in proper balance. Mikhail shows you the food storage system, a separate structure, again on stilts, that's kept at ambient outside temperature. Food storage is simple in winter, everything is frozen. It's like having giant freezer that runs for free. Meat, fish, milk, everything stays perfectly preserved at minus 60 degrees Celsius, minus 70 degrees Celsius. No spoilage, no bacteria, nothing. Can store food all winter with no problem. The storage building is fascinating. It's essentially a shed full of frozen carcasses. Whole reindeer, dozens of fish, containers of frozen milk, bags of frozen berries from last summer. Everything is rock solid, preserved perfectly, waiting to be used. This is food security, Mikhail says. We harvest in summer and autumn when animals are fat and fish are running. We preserve by freezing. Then winter we have food already prepared. Is old system, but is perfect system. But here's where it gets tricky. You can't just bring frozen food inside and let it thaw naturally, because in the interior temperature of minus 10 degrees Celsius to minus 15 degrees Celsius, food doesn't thaw, it just becomes less frozen. So preparation requires planning. For tonight's dinner, I took fish from storage yesterday morning, Mikhail explains. Fish sits in kitchen all day, slowly warms to cooking temperature. By evening is thawed enough to cook. But you must use it immediately. If you thaw food and don't use it, it starts to spoil, and you cannot refreeze because refreezing damages texture. The cooking process is careful and methodical. Nothing is rushed. The fish cooks slowly in minimal water, steam rising and condensing on the cold walls of the kitchen, creating a light frost that Mikhail periodically scrapes off and tosses into the fire. Ice buildup on walls is problem if you let it accumulate, he says. Adds weight, reduces insulation. Must scrape it off regularly. You're eating now, and the meal is surprisingly satisfying. The cooked fish is tender and flavorful. The raw frozen fish slices are delicate and clean-tasting. The liver is rich and meaty. The fat cubes provide a sense of deep satiation. The kumis is still kind of weird, but you're getting used to it. And there's tea, always tea, hot and salty and fatty, providing hydration and warmth and calories all at once. Water is problem in winter, Mikhail mentions between bites. You cannot drink snow. Eating snow lowers your body temperature, uses energy to melt snow inside you. So we melt snow over fire, make water, make tea. Is constant task, always melting snow, always making tea. Without hot liquid, without water, you dehydrate, and dehydration in cold is deadly. The paradox of dehydration in extreme cold surprises people. You'd think that in a frozen environment, dehydration wouldn't be an issue. But the opposite is true. The air is incredibly dry, humidity approaches zero. Every breath you exhale carries moisture out of your body. You're constantly losing water, and unlike in hot climates where thirst drives you to drink, in cold climates you often don't feel thirsty until dehydration is already advanced. Must drink tea every 2 hours, even if not thirsty, Mikhail says. Is discipline, is survival skill. After the meal, the cleanup process is minimal. Dishes are scraped clean. Food residue might attract animals or create waste disposal problems in spring, but they're not washed. Washing dishes in winter is difficult, Mikhail explains. Water must be heated. Used water must be disposed of carefully so it doesn't create ice problems. So we scrape dishes clean, maybe rinse with small amount of hot water, let cold sterilize them. Is acceptable in winter. The fire in the cooking stove is allowed to burn down but not out. Fire that goes out completely is difficult to restart in extreme cold, Mikhail says. Must maintain at least small embers, always. Then adding wood is easy, fire comes back quickly. Letting fire die completely means you must restart from nothing, which is much harder. Back in the main house, Sardana is maintaining the smaller warming fire in the main stove. This fire is even more minimal than the cooking fire, just a few pieces of wood burning slowly, producing almost no flame, just heat and minimal smoke. This fire, we never let it go out from October to April, Sardana says through Mikhail's translation, is constant. Someone is always responsible for maintaining fire. is sacred duty. Fire keeps family alive. The cultural significance of fire maintenance in circumpolar cultures is profound. Among the Yakut and other northern peoples, letting the family fire go out was considered a catastrophe, sometimes interpreted as a spiritual failure. Children were taught from an early age that tending the fire was a responsibility that superseded almost everything else. Historical accounts from the 18th and 19th centuries describe families fleeing from danger, from floods, from raids, and the one thing they always carried besides their children was fire. Embers wrapped in moss or bark, kept alive no matter what. Mikhail shows you the fire-tending rotation in his household. Each adult member has a 4-hour shift during the day, and at night the fire is banked, covered with ash to slow the burning, so it can last 6 or 7 hours without attention. But someone always checks at least once during night, he says. Always, because fire going out in night when everyone is asleep is death sentence. The wood supply is stored inside a covered area attached to the house, not inside the living space, but protected from snow and accessible without going outside. Wood must be dry and must be easy to access, Mikhail explains. Wet wood doesn't burn well, and wood buried in snow is difficult to retrieve. So we store 2 weeks of wood in protected area, reload from main woodpile every 10 days or so. You're beginning to understand that life in Yakutia is a constant series of maintenance tasks. Tending fire, preparing food, checking clothing for damage, inspecting shelter for problems, melting snow for water. Everything requires attention, requires time, requires knowledge and skill. There's no automation, no convenience, no ability to be lazy or forgetful. Survival is a full-time job that never stops. Is exhausting sometimes, Mikhail admits, sipping his evening tea. Is why traditionally Yakut families were large, many children, many adults, so work can be shared. One person alone trying to maintain household in Yakutian winter would struggle. 2 people is minimum for safety. More people is better. More hands for work, more eyes to notice problems, more knowledge to draw on. Outside, the stars are brilliant again, and the temperature has dropped to -73 degrees Celsius according to the thermometer. Inside, you're warm or at least not cold. The fire is burning steadily. The tea is hot. The meal has provided calories and warmth from within. The system works, as Mikhail likes to say. The fire provides minimal supplementary heat. The food provides internal fuel. The shelter blocks the wind and moderates the temperature. The clothing protects your body from direct cold exposure. Each element is essential, and each element must be maintained constantly. Tomorrow, Mikhail says, we talk about the mind, about psychology of living in endless winter, because all the clothing, all the shelter, all the food, these keep your body alive. But keeping your mind alive, keeping hope and sanity through 8 months of darkness and cold, this is different challenge. This is challenge that breaks some people, no matter how well prepared their body is. The fire crackles softly, and the wind moans around the building's corners, and somewhere in the darkness the frozen world waits, patient and eternal, testing the boundaries between human survival and the absolute limits of what human beings can endure. Day 7, and Mikhail is quieter than usual this morning. Outside, the sun made its brief appearance, more like a pale glow on the horizon than actual sunlight, and has already slipped away, leaving the world in that perpetual twilight that passes for daytime in deep Yakutian winter. Today we talk about the hardest part, he says finally, staring into his tea. The part that you cannot prepare for with clothing or shelter. The part that lives in here. He taps his temple. You're in the main house and Sardana has joined you, along with an older woman Mikhail introduces as his Aunt Klavdia, who must be in her 80s. She's lived through more Yakutian winters than you can imagine, and her eyes have that particular quality. Sharp and present, but also distant, as if part of her is always somewhere else, somewhere beyond the walls. The darkness, Mikhail begins, is not like darkness in other places, is not just absence of light, is presence of something else, something heavy. In November, the sun starts staying down longer. By December, we have maybe 3-4 hours of dim light. Not real daylight, just less darkness. By January is almost nothing. And this continues until March. He pauses. That is 4 months of darkness. For months where your body never sees real sun, where your brain never gets signal that is daytime. The psychological impact of prolonged darkness on humans is well documented scientifically, though researchers still debate the mechanisms. Seasonal affective disorder, circadian rhythm disruption, vitamin D deficiency, melatonin dysregulation, these are the clinical terms. But Mikhail and his family have different words for it. We call it the white silence, he says. Not because it's silent, wind always makes noise, life always makes noise, but because your mind becomes silent, becomes empty, becomes like the white snow outside, blank and cold and endless. Klavdia speaks in Yakut, her voice soft and rhythmic, and Mikhail translates. She says that when she was a young woman, maybe 25 years old, she lost her first husband to the white silence. Not to cold, not to accident, but to the silence. He went out one morning in February, middle of the darkest time, said he was checking the reindeer herd. Never came back. They found him 3 days later, frozen, sitting against a tree, maybe 5 kilometers from the settlement. He had just stopped, sat down, stopped trying. The silence in the room is heavy. This happens, Mikhail says quietly. Not often, but it happens. Someone just gives up. The darkness, the cold, the sameness of every day, it breaks something inside them. They stop fighting. Is not suicide exactly, they don't kill themselves. They just stop trying to live. Historians studying death records from Yakut settlements over the centuries have found patterns that support this phenomenon. During the darkest months, December through February, there's a statistically significant increase in deaths classified as exposure or accidental freezing that occur close to settlements, suggesting people who simply wandered away or stopped in circumstances where they should have survived. Modern psychology would probably classify many of these as depression-related deaths, but the Yakut understanding is more nuanced. It's not that people want to die. It's that they stop wanting to live, which is a subtle but important distinction. So how do you fight it? You ask. How do you keep the white silence from taking you? Mikhail exchanges looks with Sardana and Klavdia. Many ways, old ways, ways that our people developed over hundreds of years. He settles back. First, you must understand that in winter, you are not individual. You are part of community. In summer, you can be alone, can work alone, can live alone if you must. In winter, alone is death, not just physical death but mental death. So we stay together, we work together, we eat together, we tell stories together. The communal aspect of Yakutian winter survival is central. Extended families traditionally lived in close quarters, sometimes 20 or more people in a single large balagan or multiple connected structures. This wasn't just about shared resources or labor. It was psychological survival. When darkness comes, Mikhail explains, and you feel emptiness starting, you look around and see your family, see your neighbors, see that you are not alone. This helps. Klavdia speaks again, more animated now, and Mikhail translates. She says that every evening, from November to March, her family would gather around the fire and someone would tell a story. Not the same person every night, everyone takes turns. Children tell stories. Adults tell stories. Elders tell long sagas that take many nights to complete. The stories are not just entertainment. The stories are a reminder that humans have history, have meaning, have continuity beyond the empty darkness outside. The oral tradition among the Yakut and other circumpolar peoples is remarkably rich, and anthropologists now understand it served a crucial psychological function. The epic poetry, the myths, the historical sagas, these weren't just cultural artifacts. They were mental health interventions, ways of maintaining cognitive engagement and emotional connection during months when the environment provided no stimulation, no variety, no change. The stories remind you that winter ends, Mikhail says, that it has ended before, will end again. When you are in darkness for 4 months, it feels like darkness will last forever, like sun will never return. But the stories tell of previous winters, of spring that came after, of the cycle continuing. This knowledge, this remembered knowledge, it keeps hope alive. Sardana adds something, and Mikhail nods. She says that women especially must be vigilant about keeping minds active in winter. Women do much of the detailed work, sewing, repairing clothing, preparing skins, and this work is good because requires concentration, requires focus. Men sometimes struggle more because hunting is limited in deep winter. Reindeer herding requires less active attention when herds are brought close to settlement, and men can become idle. Idle mind in darkness is dangerous mind. The gender dynamics of winter survival are interesting and somewhat counterintuitive to modern assumptions. While men performed many of the physically demanding and dangerous tasks, women's work was often more constant and required sustained attention to detail, which may have provided better protection against the psychological emptiness of winter. This isn't to say men were more vulnerable, just that they needed different strategies to maintain mental engagement. We also maintain routines, Mikhail continues. Same wake time every day even though it's dark. Same meal times, same work times, same sleep time. Routine is anchor. Without routine, time becomes meaningless, days blur together, and you lose sense of self. So we create artificial structure through routine. The importance of maintaining circadian rhythms in the absence of natural light cues is something modern sleep science has confirmed. Without regular schedules, human circadian rhythms drift, leading to sleep disorders, depression, and cognitive impairment. The Yakut tradition of rigid daily schedules, enforced through communal expectation and habit, was an effective countermeasure against circadian disruption. Klavdia pulls out a wooden calendar, a physical object with notches and marks representing days. She says every family keeps calendar. Mikhail translates. Every evening you mark off the day. You can see visually how many days of winter have passed, how many days until spring. When darkness makes time feel infinite, being able to count days and see progress towards spring is important. You're noticing that the house has various decorations, carved wooden pieces, woven textiles, drawings made by children that seem deliberately placed. Mikhail confirms, visual stimulation. In winter, outside world is white and black and gray, no color, no variation. Inside house, we must create variation, must give eyes something interesting to see. Is why we decorate, why we create things. Is mental health practice, though our ancestors would not have called it that. The conversation turns to the specific symptoms of winter psychological decline, and Mikhail describes them with the familiarity of someone who's experienced them personally. First, you notice you are sleeping more. Sleep feels good, feels like escape. Then you notice you don't want to do tasks, even simple tasks. Checking clothing, maintaining fire feels like too much effort. Then you notice you are avoiding people, preferring to be alone. These are warning signs. When you notice these in yourself or in family member, you must take action. The action traditionally involved forced social engagement. Family or friends will come to you, will insist you participate in activity, help prepare food, help repair something, come listen to stories, anything to break the pattern of withdrawal. Sometimes the person resists, gets angry, says to leave them alone. But community doesn't leave them alone, because leaving someone alone with the white silence is how you lose them. Modern understanding of depression treatment actually aligns remarkably well with these traditional interventions: behavioral activation, social support, maintained routines, forced engagement in activities even when motivation is absent. The Yakut people developed effective depression management strategies through centuries of necessity, strategies that modern psychology has only recently validated scientifically. Mikhail talks about his own experience, about a winter 10 years ago when he felt the white silence settling over him. I was maybe 40 years old, good age, strong, experienced. But that winter, something was different. Maybe it was personal problems, maybe it was just bad winter, I don't know. But I started feeling the emptiness, started not caring about things that should matter. Sardana noticed. Wives always notice, and she told my brothers, told my mother. What followed was an intervention that Mikhail describes as both uncomfortable and life-saving. My family, they didn't let me be alone. If I tried to go off by myself, someone came with me. They gave me tasks that required interaction. Help teach nephew to prepare hides, help repair neighbor's shelter, come help slaughter reindeer. Tasks I couldn't refuse without looking like bad person, but also tasks that forced me to engage, to think, to be present. Took weeks, he says, but gradually the emptiness receded. Was not sudden cure. Was slow process of remembering why living matters. why effort is worthwhile. And the darkness outside didn't change, was still dark, still cold, still months until spring. But internal darkness, that lifted. Family did that. Community did that. Claudia speaks at length and Mikhail translates in pieces. She says the worst thing that modern world has brought to Yakutia is isolation. In old times, everyone lived in communal structures. Everyone was always surrounded by family. Now, some people live in individual houses, some young people live alone, and this is dangerous. She has seen more winter deaths in last 30 years than in all the years before, and she believes is because people are more isolated now, because traditional community structures have weakened. There's a sadness in the room as this is discussed. The tension between modern life with its privacy and independence, and traditional survival strategies that require constant social proximity. Young people especially struggle, Mikhail says. They want independence, want privacy, want to live like people in cities far from here. But they don't understand that in this environment, that kind of individualism can kill you, not just physically but mentally. The conversation shifts to coping mechanisms that might seem strange to outsiders. Sardana demonstrates a meditative practice that involves staring at the fire and consciously slowing your breathing while mentally reciting genealogy, the names of ancestors going back generations. Is grounding practice, Mikhail explains, reminds you that you are part of long lineage, that your ancestors survived winters just as dark, that you carry their strength. There's also music, traditional Yakut throat singing, and jaw harp performances that serve both as entertainment and as mental exercise. Mikhail demonstrates the jaw harp, called a komis, producing these strange, hypnotic overtones. The sound, the vibration in your mouth and skull, it stimulates brain, provides sensory input that darkness takes away. Is therapeutic, though we don't call it therapy, we call it tradition. Physical activity, even minimal, is emphasized. You must move every day, Mikhail insists. Even if it's just walking circles inside house, even if it's just doing series of stretches. Body that stops moving tells brain to shut down. Must keep body moving to keep mind active. And then there's the practice of deliberate hope cultivation, what Mikhail calls spring seeing. In darkest part of winter, you force yourself to imagine spring. You describe it out loud to family, how snow will melt, how rivers will flow, how green things will grow. You plan what you will do in spring, where you will go, what you will plant or hunt. You make these plans real by speaking them, by discussing details, by treating spring as certain future rather than impossible dream. Historians studying seasonal depression have noted that forward-looking thinking, planning for better times, is one of the most effective cognitive strategies for maintaining hope during difficult periods. The Yakut practice of communal spring planning sessions, where families would spend hours discussing spring and summer activities in elaborate detail, served this exact function. Claudia wants to show you something. She pulls out a small wooden box, intricately carved, and inside are stones. Smooth river stones in various colors. She collects these in summer, Mikhail translates. All summer, she finds beautiful stones, stones with interesting colors or patterns. Then in winter, when darkness is worst, she takes them out one at a time, studies them, remembers the place where she found each one, remembers the sunlight, the warmth, the sound of running water. Is memory practice, is color therapy, is connection to summer. You hold one of the stones. It's smooth and gray with bands of white and brown. In this dark, cold environment, this simple stone represents something precious. Proof that the world isn't always frozen, isn't always dark, that color and warmth exist even if they're temporarily absent. The mind is like fire, Mikhail says, returning to the central metaphor. Must be tended constantly, must be fed with social connection, with routine, with purpose, with hope. Neglect mind for few days, can lose it for entire winter or forever. So we have all these practices, all these traditions, all developed over centuries of learning what works and what doesn't. Is collective wisdom passed down, refined, essential. Outside, the wind has picked up, and ice crystals are rattling against the windows like tiny claws seeking entry. The darkness is complete now, absolute, and will remain so for 12 or more hours. But inside, there's light, the fire, oil lamps, human presence. Inside, There are voices, stories, the mundane sounds of life continuing despite everything. Inside, people are practicing the ancient art of keeping human consciousness alive and engaged in an environment that offers nothing to consciousness except emptiness. Tomorrow, Mikhail says quietly, we talk about failure, about what happens when all preparations fail, when situations go wrong, when survival becomes impossible. Is dark topic, but is necessary knowledge. Because understanding how people die in cold helps you understand how to avoid dying yourself. Claudia says something sharp, and Mikhail nods. She says also tomorrow we celebrate, because dwelling on darkness creates darkness. Must balance knowledge of danger with celebration of life. So tomorrow serious talk, but also music and food and laughter. Is Yakut way, respect danger, but don't let danger steal joy. The fire burns steady, and the tea is warm, and the night stretches endlessly ahead, and the white silence waits outside the walls, patient as the permafrost, ready to receive anyone who stops fighting, anyone who gives up, anyone who forgets that winter, however dark and long, is not forever. Day 8, and true to Mikhail's promise, the day begins with both gravity and celebration. There's food being prepared, more than usual, and Claudia is setting up what looks like a small shrine with carved wooden figures and offerings of fat and milk. Is traditional, Mikhail explains. When we speak of death, when we discuss failures and endings, we must also honor life and those who came before. Is balance. But first, the serious part. Mikhail has asked you to sit, and his expression is somber in a way you haven't seen before. I want to tell you about my cousin Dmitri, he begins. He was 28 years old, strong, experienced hunter, knew the land as well as anyone. He died 7 years ago, less than 10 kilometers from this house, and his death teaches important lessons about how quickly things can go wrong. Dmitri had gone out in early February to check trap lines. The weather was cold but not exceptional, around minus 62 degrees Celsius, which is practically normal for that time of year. He was properly dressed, had told his family his route, had expected to be back by evening. Everything correct, Mikhail says. He did everything right, but he didn't come back. The search party found him 2 days later. He'd fallen through ice, one of those concealed weak spots where moving water underneath keeps ice thinner than it appears. He'd managed to pull himself out, which was remarkable given that his clothing would have immediately begun freezing solid. He'd even made it about 50 meters from the water, trying to get to shelter. But his clothing was wet, Mikhail says quietly. And wet clothing at minus 62 degrees Celsius is death sentence. Doesn't matter that he was strong. Doesn't matter that he knew what to do. The water in his clothing froze, made clothing stiff and heavy, and more importantly, all insulation was destroyed. Wet fur doesn't insulate. Frozen fur doesn't insulate. He was essentially wearing ice blocks instead of protective clothing. Dmitri had tried to build a fire. The search party found the attempt, a small pile of gathered wood and evidence of striking sparks. But his hands were already too cold, his fingers not working properly, and he couldn't get the fire started. Maybe if conditions had been perfect, if wood had been perfectly dry, if he'd had more time, maybe he could have done it, Mikhail says. But in real emergency, in real cold, with body already hypothermic, making fire is almost impossible. The distance from where he was found to the nearest shelter, a hunting cabin, was less than 2 kilometers. On a normal day, that's maybe 20 minutes of walking. But in his condition, with frozen clothing weighing him down, with his core temperature dropping, with darkness and possibly disorientation, those 2 kilometers became impossible. He'd sat down to rest, and he never got back up. The lesson, Mikhail says, is that even experienced people die, even when doing everything mostly right. One mistake, walking on ice that looked solid but wasn't, an entire chain of events leads to death. Is why we say environment here has no mercy, no second chances. Sardana adds her own story about a neighbor woman who died in her own yard. She'd gone out to get firewood from the storage area, a trip of maybe 20 meters, but she'd been in a hurry. It was during a meal preparation. She needed wood quickly, and she'd thrown on only her inner fur layer, not her outer wind layer. 20 meters, Sardana says, and Mikhail translates. Should have been 30 seconds, 1 minute maximum. But a wind gust had caught the door as she came out, slammed it shut behind her, and the door latch had frozen in place. This was during a cold snap, minus 75 degrees Celsius. She couldn't get back inside. She went to the woodshed, tried to wait there for someone to notice she was gone. But without her wind layer, even inside the shed, the cold was overwhelming. By the time her husband went looking for her, maybe 15 minutes later, she was unconscious. She died despite their attempts to warm her. 15 minutes, Mikhail emphasizes, and she was within sight of her house. But cold doesn't care about intentions, doesn't care about circumstances. You are inadequately dressed in minus 75 degrees Celsius, you die. Is simple equation. The stories continue, each one a case study in how survival margins disappear in extreme cold. A hunter whose rifle strap broke, who bent down to pick up the rifle, and in doing so exposed a gap between his coat and pants where his lower back was covered only by inner layers. He got localized frostbite so severe that he couldn't walk properly, couldn't make it back to camp, and froze to death less than a kilometer from safety. A teenager who had a brief argument with his parents, stormed outside in anger, properly dressed, fortunately, but in his emotional state didn't pay attention to wind direction and got turned around in ice fog. He wandered for 6 hours before stumbling onto a road where someone found him. He survived, but lost 8 fingers and both feet to frostbite. Emotion is enemy, Mikhail says. Anger, sadness, distraction. Anything that takes your attention away from constant vigilance is enemy. You must always be thinking, is my clothing secure? Is my face protected? Do I know exactly where I am? Am I getting tired? Am I getting cold? The moment you stop asking these questions, moment you become distracted, that is moment mistakes happen. Historians examining mortality records from Yakutian settlements find that accidental deaths from cold exposure spike during the darkest months. Not coincidentally the same period when psychological strain is highest. The interaction between mental state and physical survival is direct and immediate. Depression or distraction leads to mistakes. Mistakes lead to exposure. Exposure leads to death, often within hours. But there are also survival stories, and Mikhail shares these too, because they illustrate what successful response to failure looks like. His uncle once fell into a river in November, fully dressed, in minus 55 degrees Celsius weather. He knew he had maybe 10 minutes before his clothing froze solid and he became unable to move, Mikhail says. So he ran. Full sprint, fastest he could move, toward nearest building, which was reindeer barn maybe 400 meters away. He made it with perhaps 2 minutes to spare. His outer clothing was already stiff, but his core was still warm from the exertion. He stripped completely naked in the barn. This despite it being barely warmer than outside in there, and used his knife to scrape ice off the reindeer that were sheltered there, then pressed his naked body against the animal's fur. The reindeer's body heat, combined with their thick insulation, kept him from freezing while someone went to get dry clothing. He made right choice instantly, Mikhail says with obvious admiration. No hesitation, no panic, just immediate action. Knew he had limited time, knew what needed to be done, did it. This is why he survived and why others in similar situations died. Decision-making speed and correctness in emergency. The physical symptoms of hypothermia progress with brutal efficiency at these temperatures. Mikhail describes them clinically. First comes the shivering, your body's attempt to generate heat through muscle activity. Then comes the loss of fine motor control. Your fingers won't work properly, you can't manipulate tools or even your own clothing. Then comes confusion. Your brain, deprived of adequate warmth, stops thinking clearly. You make irrational decisions, like taking off clothing, paradoxical undressing. It's called in medical literature. Then comes drowsiness, the desire to sleep, and if you give in to that desire, you don't wake up. From first shiver to death can be as little as 30 minutes in extreme cold, Mikhail says. Maybe less if wind is strong, if clothing is inadequate, if person is already tired or hungry, is incredibly fast. This is why prevention is everything. Once you are in hypothermic state, self-rescue becomes nearly impossible. Frostbite, meanwhile, is insidious because early stages don't hurt. Your extremities go numb, and numbness actually feels better than the pain of cold, so people sometimes don't realize they have frostbite until tissue is already damaged. You must check fingers, toes, face constantly, Mikhail insists. If you cannot feel them, must warm them immediately. Put hands in armpits, put feet against another person's stomach, cover face with mittened hands. Never ignore numbness. Never think, I will warm up later. Later is too late. The group injury scenarios are particularly tragic. Mikhail tells of a hunting party, 4 men, all experienced, who were caught in a sudden cold storm that dropped temperatures from -55°C to -72°C in less than an hour. They tried to wait it out in a hastily built snow shelter, but one man's clothing had gotten wet earlier in the day from perspiration, and he began to succumb to hypothermia. The other 3 faced an impossible choice. Stay with him and try to keep him warm, risking that they'd all become hypothermic, or leave him and save themselves. They chose to stay. They wrapped him in everyone's spare clothing, maintained body contact, tried to share warmth. But his core temperature continued to drop, and his hypothermia began affecting the others. Shared body heat works both ways, and a severely hypothermic person actually draws heat from warm bodies in contact. Eventually, with 2 of the 4 men now showing signs of hypothermia themselves, they made the brutal decision to leave the worst affected man and try to reach help. They didn't make it. All 3 remaining men died within a kilometer of leaving their shelter. The original hypothermic man was found dead at the shelter. The search party concluded that if all 4 had left immediately when conditions worsened, before anyone was severely hypothermic, they probably all would have survived. But compassion, the decision to stay and try to help, killed them all. Is terrible lesson, Mikhail says, and you can see this story weighs on him. Sometimes correct choice is to leave someone behind. Sometimes trying to save someone who is already dying means you die too. But making that choice, deciding to abandon family or friend, is almost impossible for humans to do. So we die together instead of living separately. The equipment failure stories are equally sobering. A man whose coat seems split, just a small tear, maybe 10 centimeters long, allowing wind to penetrate directly to his inner layers. He made it back to settlement, but the localized cold exposure had caused such severe frostbite in that area that infection set in, and he died of sepsis a week later. 10 centimeters of torn seam, Mikhail repeats. Small mistake, fatal result. A woman whose boot degraded. The seal skin sole had become brittle from age and cracked. Water seeped in, her foot got wet. The wet foot froze. She had to have the foot amputated, and in the era before modern medicine, amputation at home in winter, she died from infection. This is why maintenance is obsessive, Mikhail says. Why we check every seam, every stitch, every piece of equipment constantly. Because failure of equipment in -70°C is not inconvenience, is death. Your clothing, your shelter, your tools, they must be perfect or as close to perfect as humans can make them. But now, as promised, the tone shifts. Claudia has finished preparing food, special food, better than the daily meals. There's fresh killed reindeer meat, roasted until the fat is crispy. There's a special preparation of liver with berries that were preserved from summer. There's kumis, but also a stronger fermented drink made from mare's milk that's considerably more alcoholic. There's even imported tea, real tea leaves, rather than the usual mix of local plants. A luxury. We honor those who died, Mikhail says, pouring small amounts of the drinks onto the ground outside the door, speaking words in Yakut. But we also celebrate that we are alive, that we have survived another day, another winter. Death is part of life here, is accepted, is understood. But life is to be celebrated. Music starts, the jaw harp again, and traditional singing, and even a small drum that produces rhythmic patterns that sound almost hypnotic. The combination of the alcohol, the food, the music, and the earlier heavy discussion creates an emotional intensity that's hard to describe. You're celebrating life in a place where life hangs by incredibly thin threads, where survival is never guaranteed, where winter never stops testing everyone and occasionally collecting its due. Mikhail is explaining something about Yakut cosmology, about the belief that the spirits of those who died in winter, especially those who died in the cold, remain in the frozen land, part of the permafrost, part of the eternal ice. They are not gone, he says. They are here with us in the cold. And in spring, when surface melts, maybe small part of them rises with the melt water, returns to life through the grass, through the flowers, through new life. It's beautiful and sad and somehow fitting, the idea that death in this landscape isn't an ending but a transformation, that those lost to the cold become part of the cold, eternal and preserved, waiting. The permafrost does preserve everything, after all. The bodies of those who died here centuries ago are still intact, still present, still technically here. The celebration continues into the evening. Stories are told, not just of death but of survival, of clever escapes, of last-minute rescues, of times when everything went wrong but someone made the right decision and lived. These stories are as important as the death stories. They provide templates for survival, examples of correct responses, proof that survival is possible even when circumstances seem impossible. The balance, Mikhail says, somewhat drunk now, is understanding that death is always present but not letting death dominate your thinking. Yes, you could die. Yes, others have died. Yes, mistakes are often fatal. But also, humans have lived here for 1,000 years, have raised children here, have created culture and art and joy here. The cold is powerful, but human will, human community, human knowledge, these are powerful too. Klavdia, also drunk, is singing what Mikhail explains is a traditional song about spring. A song of hope, of change, of the promise that winter ends and life renews. It's a song that's probably been sung in Yakutian dwellings for hundreds of years, by people huddled around fires and structures made of animal skin. People who had every reason to despair but chose instead to sing, to hope, to prepare for a spring that might be months away but would eventually arrive. The evening winds down as the alcohol and food and emotional exhaustion take their toll. People are settling in for sleep, banking the fire, preparing beds. Outside, the temperature has dropped again 76 degrees C according to the thermometer, approaching the record lows. But inside, wrapped in furs, surrounded by family, lulled by traditional songs and stories and the knowledge of ancestors who survived this and worse, you feel, despite everything, despite the darkness and the cold and the stories of death, you feel safe. Not completely safe. Never completely safe in a place like this. But safe enough, protected enough, connected enough. The animal skins block the wind. The knowledge blocks the darkness. The community blocks the white silence. And tomorrow there will be another day, another test, another chapter in the endless negotiation between human persistence and natural indifference. Tomorrow, Mikhail has said, you'll talk about what comes next, about how this ancient knowledge survives in the modern world, about what's been lost and what's been preserved, about whether humans can continue to live in this place as climate changes and traditional ways fade. But tonight, you sleep, surrounded by furs and family, and the eternal cold outside the walls, dreaming perhaps of spring. Day 9, your last day in this imaginary journey through Yakutia, and you wake to find Mikhail and Sardana preparing for something different. There's a laptop on the table, incongruous among the traditional tools and animal hides, and Mikhail is video calling someone. My daughter, he explains. She lives in Yakutsk now, the capital city. Works with computer, with internet. I want you to understand how things are changing, how old and new must exist together. The daughter, Adalina, she introduces herself in nearly perfect English, appears on the screen from what looks like a modern apartment. She's wearing contemporary clothing, there's central heating visible in the background, and she could be a young professional in any city anywhere in the world. Except she's not. She's from here, from this frozen landscape, and she's navigating between two worlds that couldn't be more different. I grew up in my father's house, she says, gesturing at the screen as if indicating the structure around you. I learned to prepare skins, learned to sew traditional clothing, learned all the old ways. But I also went to university, learned programming, learned English. And now I live in a place where the temperature inside is always 22 degrees, where I can order food on my phone, where winter means putting on a coat from a store, not wrapping myself in layers of animal fur. The tension between tradition and modernity isn't unique to Yakutia, of course, but here it has life or death implications. Adalina explains that many young people are leaving the traditional settlements for cities, attracted by convenience, by warmth, by opportunities that don't require constant vigilance against freezing to death. But they're losing knowledge, she says, and there's concern in her voice. My cousins, who grew up in Yakutsk, they couldn't survive a week in my father's village. They don't know how to read the land, don't know how to prepare skins, don't know how to maintain fire. If modern infrastructure failed, if they had to rely on traditional skills, they would die. Mikhail nods grimly. Is problem. We have generation growing up who know how to use smartphone but not how to survive in an environment where their ancestors lived for 1,000 years. They are dependent on electricity, on heating systems, on supply chains from outside. This makes them vulnerable in different way than our ancestors were vulnerable. But Adalina pushes back gently. Traditional life was also vulnerable, Papa. People died regularly. Infant mortality was high. Life expectancy was short. The knowledge kept people alive, yes, but barely. Modern medicine, modern heating, modern logistics, these save lives too. My baby, she gestures off-screen. She has access to doctors, to antibiotics, to vaccines. In the old days, maybe she dies from infection or disease. Is that better? It's a legitimate point, and Mikhail acknowledges it. No, is not better. Modern knowledge saves lives, this is true. But modern knowledge can fail. Heating system breaks in -70 degrees Celsius, and if you don't know how to survive without it, you die. Supply chain fails, store has no food, and if you don't know how to hunt and preserve meat, you die. Traditional knowledge, you carry it in your head and hands. Modern knowledge, you depend on systems that can fail. The conversation highlights a genuine dilemma facing circumpolar communities worldwide. Climate change is actually making some aspects of traditional life more difficult. Ice roads that used to be reliable are now unpredictable. Permafrost thaw is destabilizing buildings and landscapes. Traditional hunting patterns are disrupted as animal behaviors change. Modern infrastructure offers solutions but also creates dependencies. The optimal path forward isn't obvious. Adalina has founded a small organization that's trying to bridge this gap. We document traditional knowledge, she explains. We video record elders demonstrating skills, we create written guides and digital archives, we teach workshops where young people can learn from masters. Is attempt to preserve knowledge even as lifestyle changes. She pulls up a website on her end, shares her screen. It's beautifully designed, modern and accessible, but the content is ancient, videos of skin preparation, of traditional clothing construction, of shelter building, of fire management. We have maybe 50 hours of video now, she says. Interviews with people like my father, people who really know the traditional ways. And young people watch, not many, but some. Maybe they never use this knowledge, but at least it exists, is documented, can be learned if needed. Mikhail is clearly proud, but also skeptical. Video is good, but video cannot teach the feel of scraping hide, cannot teach how you know when smoke treatment is complete, cannot teach instinct that comes from doing something 1,000 times. Is better than nothing, but is not same as traditional teaching, master to apprentice, over many years. You're right, Adalina concedes. But master to apprentice teaching requires that apprentices exist, that young people want to spend years learning skills they may never need. How many young people want to do that now? I tried to teach my cousin, your nephew, Papa, how to prepare reindeer hide. He quit after 3 hours. Said was boring, said was too much work. Said he would just buy jacket if he needed one. The cultural transmission of survival knowledge has always been fragile. It requires not just willing teachers but motivated students, and it requires that the knowledge remain relevant to daily life. When young people can buy insulated clothing that works adequately for city life in Yakutia, when they can rely on electric heating in grocery stores, the motivation to spend years learning traditional skills diminishes. And once a generation grows up without this knowledge, the chain is broken. But there are counterexamples. Mikhail talks about his son, Adalina's brother, who chose to stay in the traditional settlement, who learned all the old ways and is now teaching his own children. Some young people, they understand that this knowledge is precious, is unique, is part of who we are as Saka people. They choose to maintain it, to live the traditional way even though is harder because is meaningful to them. Climate change enters the conversation more explicitly now. The average winter temperatures in Yakutia have risen by about 2 to 3 degrees Celsius over the past 50 years, which sounds minimal but has significant effects. Winter is shorter now, Mikhail says. Used to be reliable cold from October to April, maybe May. Now, October and April are unpredictable. Might be cold, might be warmer. This makes planning harder, makes traditional calendar of activities less reliable. The permafrost is thawing in some areas, creating the exact building instability problems discussed earlier. Roads that used to be solid ice paths are now unreliable. Lakes that used to freeze thick and safe are now dangerous. The landscape itself is changing in ways that make traditional knowledge less applicable. Or rather, the environment is changing faster than traditional knowledge can adapt. Our ancestors adapted to change, Mikhail says. When they came to this region 1,000 years ago, they adapted to extreme cold. When Russian contact brought new materials and tools, they adapted, incorporated what was useful. We can adapt again. But adaptation while preserving essential knowledge, this is challenge. Adalina is more pessimistic. I think traditional life in settlements like Papa's will mostly end within 1 or 2 generations. Not completely, there will always be some people who choose it, who maintain it like museums maintain ancient practices. But as way of life for significant population, I think it fades. People move to cities, rely on modern systems, and traditional knowledge becomes cultural heritage rather than survival necessity. It's a melancholy prediction, and Mikhail doesn't argue against it, just looks sad. These skills, this knowledge, refined over centuries through trial and error and countless lives lost. It might soon be primarily preserved in digital archives and occasional demonstrations rather than living practice. The animal skin clothing, the traditional shelters, the intimate knowledge of surviving in -70 degrees Celsius. These might become historical curiosities, studied by anthropologists, rather than essential life skills passed parent to child. But perhaps it's more complex than simple loss. Sardana, who has been quietly listening, speaks up, and Mikhail translates. She says that knowledge is like seeds. When environment is right, seeds grow into plants. When environment is wrong, seeds stay dormant but don't die. Maybe traditional knowledge goes dormant for a time while people try modern life. But if modern systems fail, if conditions become harsh again, the seeds are still there, can still grow. As long as someone maintains the knowledge, keeps it alive even if not actively using it daily, it can return when needed. It's a hopeful metaphor, though it requires faith that the knowledge can actually survive dormancy, can be revived from documentation and occasional practice. Historians might point out that many traditional practices, once lost, are genuinely irrecoverable. The contextual knowledge, the tacit skills that can't be fully documented, fade beyond retrieval. But perhaps some knowledge is robust enough to survive if people care enough to maintain it. The video call ends, and you're back in the physical space of Mikhail's house, surrounded by the tools and materials and smells of traditional life. My daughter is right that this life is hard, Mikhail says. Every day is work. Every day is vigilance. Every day is battle against cold and darkness. In city, life is easier in many ways. But easier life is also more fragile life. One power failure, one supply disruption, and city people are helpless. We, who know how to survive with nothing but what nature provides and what our hands can make, we are resilient in a way that modern people are not. You walk outside one last time, properly dressed now after 9 days of education, and the cold hits you with familiar force. The thermometer reads -69 degrees Celsius, and the sun is making its brief appearance, a pale disk on the horizon providing no warmth, only light enough to see the endless expanse of white. This landscape has not changed fundamentally in thousands of years. Humans have changed, technologies have changed, but the cold remains, the permafrost remains, the challenge remains. This place, Mikhail says, standing beside you, both of you wrapped in layers of carefully prepared animal skin. It tests humans, has always tested humans. Tests your body. Can you stay warm? Can you find food? Can you survive the physical challenge? Tests your mind. Can you endure the darkness? Can you maintain hope? Can you survive psychologically? Tests your community. Can you work together? Can you support each other? Can you maintain social bonds under stress? He pauses, looking at the horizon. The animal skins, the traditional knowledge, the old ways. These are how our ancestors passed the tests. Modern ways, maybe they pass the tests differently, maybe easier. But the tests remain. And the cold, it doesn't care what method you use. It only cares if you survive or not. You think about everything you've learned over these 9 days. The precise techniques for preparing reindeer hide. The layering system that creates microenvironments of warmth. The architectural principles for building on permafrost. The fire management that balances warmth against danger. The food preparation that maximizes nutrition and minimizes fuel use. The psychological practices that fight the white silence. The community structures that provide support and accountability. The stories and celebrations that maintain hope. Each piece of knowledge represents lives lost in the learning. Each technique was refined through generations of trial and error, where error meant freezing to death, meant starving, meant going mad from isolation and darkness. The sum total of this knowledge is humanity's answer to one of the most extreme environments on Earth. An answer paid for in suffering and death, tested continuously, maintained through cultural transmission, and now facing an uncertain future. The wind picks up, and ice crystals swirl around you, creating momentary patterns in the air before dispersing. The cold presses against every surface of your body, held back by layers of fur and leather, by knowledge embodied in material and technique. You are warm, or at least not dying, because people who came before figured out exactly which animals to use, exactly how to prepare their hides, exactly how to layer and orient and seal every element. Time to go inside, Mikhail says. Is cold even for standing and talking? You follow him back, moving slowly and deliberately, always aware of your body, your clothing, your environment. This awareness is now second nature after 9 days of immersion, this constant monitoring of temperature and wind and clothing integrity and shelter proximity. It's exhausting to be this vigilant constantly, but it's also what keeps you alive. Inside, Sardana has prepared final meal, special meal, farewell meal, though of course this entire journey has been imaginary. A thought experiment conducted from wherever you actually are, probably somewhere much warmer and safer. The meal includes all the traditional elements. Stroganina, cooked fish, reindeer meat, organ meats, fat cubes, kumis, salty butter tea. It's food designed for an environment where the human body burns 5,000 calories per day just maintaining core temperature, where fat is survival and protein is essential and vegetables are impossible. You have learned much, Mikhail says as you eat, but you have learned maybe 5% of what there is to know about surviving here. Takes lifetime to truly master this knowledge, and even masters still learn, still make discoveries, still refine techniques. Is knowledge that is never complete because environment is always changing, because animals change their behaviors, because permafrost shifts and ice patterns vary and no 2 winters are exactly the same. He's right, of course. 9 days, even 9 imaginary days of intensive learning, barely scratches the surface. You've learned the principles, seen the techniques demonstrated, understood the reasoning. But actually being able to execute these skills under stress, in real cold, with your life depending on getting every detail right, that would take years of practice, years of mistakes and corrections and gradual skill development. But the most important thing you have learned, Mikhail continues, is respect. Respect for the cold, respect for the environment, respect for the knowledge that keeps people alive here. Many outsiders, they come to Yakutia and they think we are primitive, think we are backward because we use animal skins and live in simple structures and maintain old ways. They don't understand that our knowledge is sophisticated, is scientific, is result of 1,000 years of experimentation and refinement. The animal skin that blocks the wind, he says, gesturing at the clothing hanging on pegs. This is not primitive. This is optimal solution to specific problem. The layering system we use, the building techniques, the food preparation, the psychological practices, all of these are sophisticated technologies, are complex knowledge systems, are worthy of respect and study. He pours more tea, and the ritual of tea, the constant presence of hot liquid, the social act of sharing, the warmth both physical and psychological, feels like it encapsulates something essential about human survival in extreme environments. It's not about dominating nature or conquering challenges. It's about small, careful practices maintained consistently over time. It's about community and knowledge and respect for what can kill you. If you remember nothing else, Mikhail says, serious now. Remember this, humans can survive almost anywhere if we have knowledge, if we have community, and if we have respect for the environment we live in. The cold here is extreme, but humans adapt, humans persist. Other places have different extremes. Heat, drought, altitude, isolation, and humans find ways to survive there too. Is testament to human intelligence and human community and human stubbornness. Outside, the brief daylight is fading, and the long night is beginning again. The temperature will drop further, it always does at night, perhaps to minus 75 degrees Celsius, perhaps lower. The darkness will be absolute, the stars brilliant in the dry air, the cold patient and eternal. And in structures held together with sinew thread and insulated with carefully prepared animal hides, humans will maintain their small fires, will drink their tea, will tell their stories, will check their clothing and monitor their buildings and support their communities, will survive another night in a place that shouldn't sustain human life but somehow, impossibly, does. The animal skins that block the wind, the reindeer hides and horse leather and Arctic fox fur, all transformed through knowledge and labor into protection against temperature that can kill in minutes. These represent something profound about human existence. We are physically weak compared to many animals, poorly adapted to extreme environments, lacking natural insulation or thick skin or any inherent protection against extreme cold. But we have intelligence, we have culture, we have the ability to learn from those who came before and to adapt what we learn to our circumstances. We can borrow the adaptations of other species, where the fur that evolution spent millions of years developing, use the techniques that centuries of human experience have refined. And so humans live in Yakutia, have lived here for 1,000 years, will perhaps continue to live here in some form for generations to come. The specific techniques may change, the balance between traditional and modern may shift, but the fundamental challenge remains. How do you keep warm when the environment wants you frozen? How do you maintain hope when darkness is endless? How do you preserve knowledge and community in conditions that constantly test both? The answer, developed through centuries and maintained through cultural transmission and currently navigating an uncertain transition into modernity, involves animal skins meticulously prepared, buildings carefully engineered, fires constantly tended, food strategically preserved, communities deliberately maintained, and stories continuously told. It involves understanding that survival in extreme environments is never individual, is always communal, always dependent on inherited knowledge, always requiring respect for the forces that could destroy you. As this imaginary journey ends, as you prepare to return mentally to wherever you actually are, the lesson lingers. Human survival in extreme environments is not about human strength or dominance. It's about human adaptability, human cooperation, human intelligence applied patiently over generations. The animal skins that block the Yakutian wind are emblems of this truth. We survive not by being stronger than nature, but by being clever enough to work with it, patient enough to learn its lessons, and humble enough to respect its power. The fire burns low, and Mikhail banks it for the night, covering the coals with ash so they'll survive until morning. Sardana prepares the sleeping area, laying out furs in careful layers. Outside, the cold settles in, minus 74 degrees Celsius and dropping, and the wind tests the walls, and the darkness is complete. But inside, wrapped in layers of knowledge and community and carefully prepared animal hide, humans rest, secure in techniques proven through centuries, ready to face another day in the world's coldest inhabited place. And somewhere, perhaps, a young person is watching Adelina's videos, learning how to prepare a hide or construct a traditional garment, keeping the knowledge alive even if they never use it, maintaining the seeds that might someday need to grow again. The future is uncertain, the transition is ongoing, but the knowledge persists, and with it, the possibility that humans will continue to survive, continue to adapt, continue to thrive even in places where survival seems impossible. The cold doesn't care. It never has. But humans, armed with knowledge and community and respect, have learned to survive it anyway. And that, perhaps, is the real story, not about temperature or clothing or techniques, but about human persistence in the face of overwhelming environmental hostility, about our remarkable ability to adapt and endure and pass our knowledge forward generation after generation, creating pockets of warmth and light and life in the coldest, darkest places on Earth. And now, as this journey comes to a close, let your mind rest gently with these final thoughts. The images fade softly. The endless white of the frozen landscape, the warm glow of fire through animal skin walls, the patient faces of people who have learned to live where life shouldn't be possible. Let them drift away like ice crystals on the wind, present but not demanding, there but not insistent. You've traveled to the edge of human survival, have walked through knowledge refined by centuries of necessity, have understood that adaptation and respect and community are what allow humans to persist in places that seem designed to end us. And now you can let that understanding settle quietly, become part of your deeper knowing without needing to hold it actively in your mind. The cold of Yakutia will remain long after this story ends, patient and eternal and indifferent. But you are here, warm and safe wherever you actually are. The animal skins have done their work, not literally protecting your body, but protecting your imagination, allowing you to visit impossible cold and return safely. The knowledge has been shared, the stories have been told, the lessons have been offered. Let your breathing slow now, matching the pace of life in deep winter. Everything measured, everything careful, everything conserved. Let your muscles relax, tension melting away like spring thaw, which comes eventually, always comes eventually, no matter how long and dark the winter seems. Let your thoughts become less distinct, merging together like ice fog, present but not clear, there but not defined. The fire burns low, the tea grows cold. The darkness outside is complete but no longer threatening, just present, just part of the cycle. And you, wrapped now in whatever comfort surrounds you in your actual space, can rest knowing that you've touched something profound, the human capacity to survive, to adapt, to maintain hope and community even when every external circumstance argues against it. Sleep now if sleep is calling you. Rest now if rest is what you need. The knowledge remains, the story continues, and somewhere in Yakutia the cold wind blows. The animal skins block its passage, and life persists in the darkness, patient and resilient and remarkably, beautifully stubborn. The journey ends, the story rests, and you, dear listener, can rest as well.